Ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, bum, bum. Da-da-da, da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-bum. Ba! Hello, everybody. Let's see. Is this going to work for me? It is. Woohoo! And, oh good lord, it's not the 8th of March. Ooh. I need to change that. I forgot to change that today. How are we all doing? I am going to take my hat off, don't worry. My hat is going to go off. Because I do realise you're getting used to seeing me with my hat on, but that's because, well, again, there's the Scottish-Cornish blood going on here. I turn on the radiator only if it's really, really cold. In fact, my mother has started saying that the electricity meter is her methodology of working out how cold it is outside, because she can tell when I turn on my radiator, because it's electric, and if that comes on, it's freezing cold. Officially too cold for the dogs to go out. Hello, everyone. Greenboys is a nickname because the new shells which worked properly were green. Well, yes, because they were painted green, yes. That's to help them differentiate, yes. They were, and it was a nickname. Hello, William Cox. Your feed treated you right today, that's good. Hello, Peter Dawson. You will have seen that this week's technology video, submarines, wasn't helped by the fact that I re-recorded it about a dozen times, and B, didn't go up till about 9 o'clock last night. Didn't go live, so I do apologise for that, but that's because it's so long it actually stumped into the extra long processing time for YouTube. Nice water. Hello Jacob, hello DG40, hello John Shea, hello Karma Gasberg, hello Michael Cooch. Hello William Cox, hello Peter Dawson, hello Carmen Gasberg, I think that's that. Hello Bijan, nice to go everyone. Which Kaiser ship? There will be a lot of discussions. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Hello Tanef, hello DH89, hello. It's a very bad day for pretty much the entire German fleet at various points. Greenboys has a lot more of an effect than just the 15-inch shells. Okay, it's... I'm going to move this a bit more this way because I keep disappearing out of it. And let's make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, the first thing you have to realise is I have to refine the question a tad to work it out. And make sure it's all sort of sensible. Hello, Barnium. Do they try to go to full battle when they know the shells are working? To be honest, the Germans presumed the British shells were working, so that doesn't really affect whether they're going for a full battle. There is an interesting discussion at various points in this action as to whether or not they break off earlier. That's an interesting discussion to have. I wasn't running... I was roughly 3 minutes late starting. And I have to admit, the reason I was 3 minutes late starting was because, to be honest, the dogs got wet walking them, so I was blow-drying a corgi and a poodle with a hairdryer. If anyone's ever been through the experience of trying to towel them, you'll know why I was trying to use a hairdryer for it. That wasn't much of an improvement. Not much of an improvement at all. Jacob, a wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to. Pretty much. But in this case, I was actually running to time until it was a case of wet dogs. And this is despite having a cooker repairman come around today and various other weird things. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, Match Dossel. Hello, William Cox. Hello, JMF. And hello, David Goulding. Hello, Friendly Sea Mine. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, Darius. Hello, Just Come. Okay, right. So, this is the question. What if history? Greenboy shells have been developed and deployed in time for Jutland. What difference would this have on the battle and the immediate aftermath, immediate post-war? Well, this is a very interesting question to start off with, because it changes a lot, but you have to work out when it's going to change. Shameless book plug. Don't take this the wrong way. This is the reason I am working on more books, so I can do a shameless book plug with a different book. But you know, I am going to do this one. Right. The book checks, really important. Really important. It's not just to me, but to a lot of my colleagues. But while I'm talking about books, I am going to do a mention of some books. I had fun with sources for this video. I of course have Jutland. I have Skagerrak. And I have the Jutland Scandal. I have a whole host of other books as well which were consulted during this video. Honestly, there is a whole pile of books that way and a whole pile of books down there which have come out for it, but these three I have gone through many, many times to try and figure this all out and get myself a rough timeline that I can work with. And before we get into this, I will say, do not Google shells at Jutland, because some of the websites that come up are absolutely terrible. Some of them are good. Some of them have very good information, but have bits which are very basic bits of information which are wrong, which makes you question everything else they write. And I mean makes you question everything else they write seriously. Because the amount of books, amount of websites I read where they have Jellicoe in the wrong position. I was reading one book which was going, he was director of Naval Ordnance at this point, and I was going, no he wasn't, he was 3rd Sea Lord. And they keep referring to him in that year as being the director of Naval Ordnance. At that year, it was the year he was actually 3rd Sea Lord. He'd been director of Naval Ordnance about 3 years prior. And the various things he gets into. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And I will say also, with this one, I had to work out what exactly was the likely timetable for it to actually come in. What was the likely scenario that you have Greenboys developed earlier? Because I'm not, as you know, because of the way I do alternate history, because I try and keep it as close to history as possible, and I try and look at it, because for me it's a historical tool. It's a tool of analysis to examine decisions made, to look at the different routes they could have gone. And I had to start working back and working out timelines and working things for where it could come back. And I'm going to take you through all this, because I think sometimes these videos are as much a chance for me to explain and explore and discuss methodology as they are to discuss the history. Because if I do it for you and just do everything, then that kind of means you also have to ask me questions. Whereas I like the idea of you being able to go off and work through stuff using similar methodology yourself, and then come back to me with ideas, and us having a discussion. That's what I like. That's one of the things I like about this channel. So, yeah. That's part of what today is about. But, yes. It's thanks to this, and not regular paycheck, which was again late, that I am, well, not having to use Patreon money for food this month. Possibly buying iron brew of it, but that's about it. Right. Just Funk, hello. Team Richards, hello. Mantra Dorsal, you were remarkably on time given your usual starts. I know, I do have a habit of running a little bit late. I did put it back to 7 o'clock because that made it that I thought would make it more on time, because I'm still walking the dog at the same time. But unfortunately, I then made the mistake of actually telling my family that it was a 7 o'clock start. And that means they think that they can ask me for things right up until about 7 o'clock, and that's my mistake. I should tell them it was 6:30 still, and then give myself half an hour space. Thank you, Seneca. Well, yes, I know, but that's also another reason why I do book reviews. It's like, I have had some books sent to me today, which I'm reviewing, which will be in Sunday's brew ships. Again, if I get rid of this one, will be in Sunday's brew ships. And these have all been sent to me. They've sent me it's the same people. They've sent me a second copy of Lepanto. I'm not sure if this is any different to the previous version of Lepanto they sent me. I'm checking it, and I'm going to see. I don't think it is. And they've also sent me Royal Navy torpedo vessels, which was actually quite useful. This arrived early enough in the week. I did actually go through this and use this a bit, because once you start fixing shells, there are lots of areas where you can fix shells in. And this arrived, which I have the battleships of. And, yeah, so now I have the heavy cruisers also arrived. But those aren't the big purchases for me this week. The big purchase that has arrived this week, the really expensive book I have bought this week. Hang on, where is it? There it is. Yeah. Coming up for the 19th of March. These two have arrived to add to my collection. And I do keep meaning to point out to a certain historian friend of mine who's really keeps trying to deal with a certain admiral of Korean extraction, then keeps going, I can't find sources, and I keep forgetting to say there's a Cambridge history of Korea like there's a Cambridge history of China. I will get round to doing that at some point. Probably when I've got the copy of the book myself and I can just loan it to him, because that's nicer. Oh, wrong one. Right one. Jacob, I really hate it when supposedly the sources have basic things wrong. Look, some of the websites, there was one, I'm not going to get into it because I actually do know the people behind it. And whilst they're not as good of friends as other people who run other websites are, they are nice people and they're well-meaning. And I was going through their stuff on it and going, no. Actually, slightly off, but historical differences. It seems that at least 3 admirals worked themselves to death prior to World War II. Drake's videos put the pre-war attrition in perspective. Mm-hmm. There are lots of them. Right then. So, let's consider what damage actually happened, because there is something that goes on with most people when you're talking about Jutland. They will tell you about the 3 battle cruisers the Royal Navy lost. They won't tell you about the battle cruiser of the Germans, which the Germans end up scuttling on the way home because it's so damaged it can't get there. And they won't tell you about the fact that Seydlitz had to be... This is Seydlitz going home. That is a ship which is barely afloat. In fact, that is such a feat of sailoring and a feat of being of such a feat of the crew. It is amazing. Seydlitz getting home is 100% down to the quality of their crew, and also 100% down to the fact that the Royal Navy at night, every time they sort of see it and interrogate it, decide not to do anything for various reasons. Mostly because they're worried about torpedo boats because of Tsushima. And they're worried, you know, if they fire at something, they'll reveal their position and be attacked by torpedo boats at night. Whereas the Royal Navy of World War II would have gone, you're this slow at night? Bye-bye. And this is the first area we're going to have a discussion about this evening. And while I remember discussions, after this is over, I will be on Clarke Chat. Okay? On Discord, after this, on the Discord server, I'll be in the Clarke chat. Hello, Yikers. And this is the Flinger. You can see some of the damage onto the Flinger. Look at that damage. So, the fact is, and above there is what's representing Lutzow. The fact is, the Germans lose a pre-dreadnought, the Pommen, and the Lutzow. They lose 2 ships. Out of 37, the British lose 3 that were there. And you have to remember, the British have Queen Elizabeth and Australia both sitting off being repaired for various reasons. And they are elsewhere, so they're not part of the fleet. And they have all sorts of things under construction. So, and the Germans don't. The Germans have Goeben, but that's no real help because that's sitting off in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire. It's not really any help to anyone in the North Sea. And that is the scenario dealing with after Jutland. So, yes, the British have lost a lot, but the Germans have also lost. Hello, Glenn. Now, this is something which has to be understood. The sheer amount of damage the British did do with the shells they had. Okay? There are some very interesting stats which come out. Someone on one website, which comes very, very high up in the Google search, when you type in the Battle of Jutland, shells at Jutland, or anything like that, basically suggested that the British only scored 34 hits with their phraseology. And you realise that Sadler's got hit 22 times alone. That's her getting home. You start to realise, okay, yes, what you're doing, what they've probably talked about, is they're probably talking about individual ships which got roughly 17 hits. Or the ship which maybe got 34 hits. And that's one of the first things you discover when going through these books. Some of the ships get hit a tremendously lot. Skagerrak is very useful for this. You go through and you realise the sheer amount of damage that is being done to German ships. The German battle fleet that gets home is in a terrible state. It's not ready to fight at all. In fact, I would like to point out this little thing. The Italian battle fleet after Taranto, the ships that are actually afloat and viable, are in a far better state. Including, of course, Julius Caesar, than the Germans are after Jutland. It's one of the interesting things. The British lose more ships, but the British ships are overall in better condition after the battle than the German ships. And that's the books which tell you that. The books which are their own sources. You read through it and you go, oh. So that starts to give you a problem of what's going on here. Why is this? Why is this happening? Hello, Glyn. I'm not sure if I said Glyn, but hello, Glyn, but hello. Each of done quite a lot of damage when there are a few turret hits where if you get more penetration, Germans might have the reputation for going up in the magazine hits. It does depend on where you're hit. I would say it also has quite a big factor when it comes to quite how much damage was done and where it was done. One of the things you notice about the British damage is it tends to be higher up the ship. They tend to be doing a lot of damage to the upper works and to the top of the ship. There's also a scenario whereby occasionally the Germans seem to have got lucky with semi-plunging fire. Now, there is also a scenario that, for example, one of the Royal Navy battle cruisers, which gets lost, literally appears out of the smoke and is strangely silhouetted, and I'll be getting into this, for about a good few minutes. Long enough that it gets two other German battle cruisers firing on it managed to each get off 3 salvos at the ship. And it's absolutely perfectly illuminated. And brilliantly visual. And if that freak accident happens and they get such a close bearing when everything else has been descending behind smoke, life goes wrong. There is also another problem you have to consider. The Royal Navy is coordinating, arguably, about 4 different generations of capital ship. And I'm using that phrase now because you have to remember, once we're talking about guns and shells, we have to talk about something across battleships and battle cruisers, and it's easier for me to just go capital ships. So using roughly 4 different generations of capital ships in terms of armouring and gunnery, and they've got a mixture of Dreher fire control tables, and of course by gum. Pollen fire control tails. I kept wanting to call it powerful fire control tables, and knowing that was wrong. Now, Dreher is an interesting character who's going to come up a lot in today's discussions, because he's pretty darn important. Because Dreher is the person who will be heading up the construction of the Greenboy. Right. So let's talk about the Greenboy shell. What are we looking at? What are we talking about? Now, the British APCs, armour-piercing capped, to penetrate German armour at Jutland was partly due to the sensitive nature of the lyddite bursters, which caused many shells to explode immediately following impact on the target. In the next few years, a new burster shell called shellite was developed, which was a mixture of lyddite and dinitrophenol, which was a much weaker and sensitive explosion. Originally a mixture of 50-50 was used, but this gave insufficient fragmentation. Tests with 60% and 40% of DNP persons were satisfactory, and it was this combination that was used for the first Greenboy APC projectiles. Issued beginning in 1918, soon after the end of the war, it was determined that a 70-30 mixture would give improved fragmentation while maintaining adequate margin against premature explosions. The mixture was used for all subsequent British APC projectiles of this caliber. Now that's from the Navy website. And that is, broadly speaking, what we're talking about, because guess what? Shells are painted different colour depending on what explosive is in them. If they are lyddite shells, they are yellow. If they are lyddite dinitrophenol, i.e. DNP, they are green. It's to make it easy to work out, so you know what you're getting and you know what you're grabbing. Makes it very easy for logisticians. It makes it very easy for crews who are loaded when they're loading their guns. It makes it very easy for everyone storing magazines. Oh, and I will say this now, if you want to have fun, the last slide of this video, well, second to last slide of this video, is going to make you all laugh. Because there was another bit of history which I managed to get into here. The battle, please note, and this is the first thing, Greenboy shells, if they come, even if they come around before Jutland, the Germans aren't going to not come and have a fight. Okay? The German appreciation on British shells, the Germans actually estimated British shells were more dangerous than they were. So the Germans were still coming out to fight when they believed British shells were better than they were. But there is a scenario which is quite likely as well in this scenario, in this thing. So that's the Greenboy shell. So here is some development and history of the Greenboy, and I'm going to expand this slide a little bit for you all, and then we're going to talk about it. So, the Greenboy was primarily intended to penetrate to machinery spaces and either slow the enemy down to reduce maneuverability or get an out-and-out kill at long range by hitting a magazine. That's pretty much the Greenboy's purpose. The trouble is the Lyddite shells and other systems which have been used beforehand were basically based on Toshima, which, whilst it was using tactics which would be suitable for an all-big gun fleet and make the way for a Dreadnought class style battleship, they were also very much tactics and scenarios of the pre-Dreadnought era, where you got closer, and that would affect the angles of what you impacted with, etc., and also had an impact therefore on caps. However, in 1910, John Jellicoe, as 3rd Sea Lord, had attempted to tighten up sea quality control on British shells, which is something he'd also attempted to do first as Director of Naval Ordnance and Torpedoes between 1905 and 1907. He had Commander Dreyer as a senior assistant during that period. Eventually Jellicoe got his wish when, as 1st Sea Lord, he appointed the by then Captain Frederick Dreyer, printed later in life as an Admiral, as Director of Naval Ordnance. And basically Dreyer's rate of progress was very quick. He decided the current shells were not up to standard anyway, caps were too soft, tending to get torn off during oblique impacts, and caps were supposed to allow them to penetrate. Shell bodies were not strong enough, often breaking up, which prevented or reduced the effectiveness of the filling inside. Both these factors were compounded the Lyddite issues already mentioned, which caused premature explosion. And on top of all this, the fuses were unreliable. So, by May 1917, orders for trial shells had gone out. By September, the new mixture of Lyddites and denatrophenol was being introduced into the shell filling factories. A new standard for testing had been set. For 15-inch shells, it was a 10-inch plate, angled at 20 degrees. And for a 12-inch shell, it was a 6-inch plate, angled at 20 degrees, which had defeated 15-inch shells during the projectile committee testing in March 1917. And the projectile committee had been sent up after the Battle of Jutland, and had only managed to get to actual testing by March 1917. And basically, it was a case of you not moving fast enough, so Jellicoe appointed Dreyer as in his old flag captain as in charge of ordnance. Fix it. And he did. Mass production started in December 1917, and unfortunately due to normal wartime issues, the new shells didn't reach the fleet till April 1918, where they earned their name Greenboys due to their paint scheme. Approximately 18 months under wartime conditions. So, what are you getting from this? Well, for starters, the British knew there were problems with shells from as early as 1905. I.e., when they're building HMS Dreadnought, they know there's an issue with shells. Now, what are the issues with shells? We'll talk about that as things go on, but there are problems with British shells. There is a problem in British infrastructure industry when it comes to shell construction. Because there are two conflicting demands. One, you're rapidly expanding the fleet, so you need to rapidly expand shell construction and shell procurement. A rapid expansion of these things mitigates against you also tightening quality controls as a rule, because that's going to slow down your expansion. And what do the politicians want? The politicians want to announce they're ordering millions of shells. They don't want to announce those millions of shells are delayed because they're terrible. So you have a problem. Now, the point is, at the same time as this is going on, you have a huge amount of work being put into the Royal Navy's fire control systems. You have the Drea fire control table. You have the Pollen fire control table. You have and the Argo clock, as it's called at various points. You have both these systems being pushed into it and developing. And so the Royal Navy is trying to work on its accuracy. But it's, to an extent, it's like you are... I forgot. Okay. So, let's say you had got a form that you had to cut up. One of those lovely plastic forms that comes out with lots of all the different parts to your components, but they're very, very small, some of them. So you have magnifying glasses on. It's nice ones which hook down over your face and allow you to really see in, give you good long range, and you have a very precise metal scalpel blade which is nice and long, but not too long, perfect for the magnifying range. But on the end, you've got a blade which is blunt and brittle. That is the scenario you're dealing with. Anyone looking at you from a distance, you look strong, you look powerful, you've got the right tool, you visibly got the right tool, you've got the right gear, you look great, you look impressive, you look scary. But you've also got the fact that, in the nicest way, you're not going to be able to do that good a job. So, this is the Greenboys' history. The Greenboy comes about because after Jutland, as much as some people like to believe that this holds sway, which is published under Beatty, and it's the Naval Staff Appreciation, that is the later appreciation. This is the appreciation which is done whilst Jellicoe is First Sea Lord. And this is a different scenario. Do I have a good source on those systems? Let me see if I can find my British battleships book. That's the best source on them, really. Somewhere up here. I had it out not long ago. Where are you now? No, you're not it. Bum ba dum bum bum. No. Where's it gone? Where's my old British battleships book? If anyone spotted my old British battleship book, please tell me. That's China Station. No. Ah, there it is. Is it? Yes, that's it. Yeah. John Roberts. That's got a fairly good one in it. But that's not the one necessarily. The British battleships of World War One version of this is better on that. I've got it somewhere around here, he says. Looking for it. Can't find it at the moment. Here's the answer I'm going to give. And I put books down somewhere. Oh, there. I go there. You can go there as well. But no, somewhere around here, I do have another big book. That other one. Where have I put it? No, not that one. That one. No, sorry. Those are going to be fine, but the World War One one is better. I can't find it at the moment. Drac probably is on a video on it at the moment. Anyway, so. The scenario therefore you're looking at is if you want things available for Jutland, has to be at least 18 months before it. Bear in mind as we go through the next slides. Bear in mind that. So the real question becomes, as we know, quality issue controls are the big factor that affect shells. What if history is Greenboy shells are being developed in Jutland, deployed down with Jutland? The real question we're looking at today is, what if proper quality control and trials testing been implemented for Royal Navy shell procurement prior to Jutland? I.e., if they just started off prior. If they managed to actually deal the problems prior. So that's the question we're sort of actually looking at today. Because let's be honest, it doesn't matter if it's called a Greenboy or not. What we're looking for is a shell which goes through proper quality control. What you're dealing with, arguably, is the British in World War One are dealing with a scenario which the Italians are dealing with in World War Two. My water tastes funny for some reason. Oh well. Okay. Right. So, I'm going to stop drinking that. Probably have to have another can of iron brew. Now again, imagine the Runa FRA is getting blow dried and brings me joy. Yes, they enjoy. Well, they don't enjoy it, but then they do enjoy it. So where could this alternate history start? Well, this is where it got to an interesting question. So my first thought was, right then, Dogger Bank. And then I started thinking about the timeline. Dogger Bank took place in January 1915. So to get to May 1916 from January 1915 is 16 months? That's a problem. 16 months is a problem, isn't it? Because that's well within the 18 months. So that's far too short a time. So Dogger Bank it cannot be. So we have then, in theory, other options. The Battle of Heligoland Light, 1914. Trouble is there's no German capital heavy units present. The Battle of the Falkland Islands, again, 1914, but again, no German capital units present. Pursuit of Govan and Breslau, well, there is technically no Allied British capital ships present, but the reason Indomitable and their Factable are not present is because they're detached from Trowbridge with Milne to go off and cover in case Govan makes a break for the Atlantic. Whereas it's been led for Trowbridge, they could well have been there. And peacetime options. Well, there are peacetime options for starting off an accurate history. So, Third Sea Lord, as part of the Orion class, as Third Sea Lord, part of a shell program, Jellicoe managed to get proper trials and quality control implementation with the support of Fisher and other key personalities. Now, this is not without precedence, as might have seen, due to the efforts then going on for fire control tables, which led to HMS Thunderer, which is the last battleship built at the Thames Iron Works, being the second vessel to be built with directed fire control. So this is the scenarios you have to go through and have to think. When you're doing alternative history, you have to start thinking through what is the most likely scenario for this to come about. You can't just parachute in a change. You have to go back and think, well, what is the reasoning? At what point could this change be justified as happening? So we either have to suddenly move some capital ships to either the Falkland Islands or Heligan Blight. But the problem is, again, if you think about it, how much information do you get from those ships? And again, coming up, Mark Harkness has already jumped onto it. Falklands was an overwhelming victory for the Navy. Navies seldom learn their own failings when they win big. Yeah, that is the trouble. Both Heligan Blight in 1914 and the Falkland Islands are pretty much British wins. Solid wins. Okay, that's a problem. So, honestly, you end up with a problem very quickly. And I know I'm sort of racing through slides, but I've got a lot of slides today. There's about 18 of them. And there's the ones when we're talking through the battle are going to take a lot longer to go through than the ones we're talking about setting up the scenario. So, all pretty much already followed my logic and come down to there are two options that are viable. I have to go for the pursuit of Goeben and Breslau and the Orion class permutation. Now, there are problems with both these scenarios. For Goeben and Breslau, well, Goeben would need to be engaged but not sunk. It would ideally be run ashore on a Greek island or take refuge in a Greek harbour and not destroyed. This would allow for it to be closely examined as to the damage done. With such evidence coming back, Jellicoe as Grand Fleet Commander would be able to push, probably with the support of Beatty and Milne, for the improvement to shell construction. Information which we gathered by September 1914, giving roughly 21 months for implementation. Think about that. You see, again, in the other two scenarios, there's no chance of you getting to have a look at a German ship. And the thing is, they're going to be small battles, so you're not going to get the chance to look at it. But if you have Goeben driven into a Greek port, even if she does to herself what the Graf Spee does, and sinks herself in shallow water, and let's be honest, most of the harbours in that area are not that deep that she could get into if she was running away. The British will be able to go and have a look at it. There is no doubt in my mind that the Greeks would allow them to. And that would mean the British would be walking around going, oh look, our shells hit here, and they haven't done anything. Sugar, what happened? You can imagine that information getting back to the Admiralty, getting back to the First Sea Lord. It would also mean Trowbridge and Milne would not suffer their careers so because of the events that happened, in which case you probably have a very different scenario taking place in terms of command in the Mediterranean, and also Trowbridge might be, who's quite senior in his own ways, would probably be properly rewarded with a senior posting somewhere. You never know, there might actually be a decent chief of staff given to good old Beatty to manage him. Now, as 96831 has already pointed out, Goeben would only go to a Greek port if there was no choice. Yes, but again, as you see, as I can point to historical events, ships have gone into port when they've had no choice. And if you've got two battle cruisers and cruisers engaging you heavily and you're on fire or some damage like that, then escaping into a port could well be a course of action you take. It becomes a viable scenario for you to do. So the other option is she tries to sink herself with all hands, but I don't think they do that. The Germans are honourable, they are brave, they will not sacrifice their ships, they will not see their ship try to, keep their ships from British hands, but they're not suicidal. Orion class permutation. Well, Armstrong, Whitworth and Vickers are the big problems. They are the ones who have maintained the same test for decades. Because those tests, whilst not being realistic for modern ships, are great for their shells. Well, the example I'd give for those tests is they are testing a 15-inch shell would be tested against something like a 6-inch plate angled at 20 degrees. And that was their test they were using it for, and they were using it for it. So it's not really realistic. That's the thing. Also, does it mean the British shells were not probably tested prior to World War I? They're setting up an armoured wall, firing a few shells at it, and then checking out they burst is not hard. You would think, but the problem was, A, it was found they were using the previous generation armour plate. B, they weren't angling it, and C, they were testing 15-inch shells, as mentioned, against a 6-inch plate angled at 20 degrees. And even that wasn't being done quite so properly. It was being done under so it'd be absolutely perfect conditions. So, now, interestingly enough, historically, every time Jellicoe starts to make headway on this issue, in 1907, 1910, he ends up getting promoted, and his successor has to start from scratch. The example I would give you is, think about, there is a national database in the long-running TV series, well, when I say long-running, the very good comedy series from about 20-odd years ago, called Yes, Minister. There is a series in it. There is an episode in it called The National Database. And there are all sorts of issues raised. And the minister goes to his predecessor, who was actually the minister when the previous party was in power. So, when the minister was in opposition himself. And finds out that actually all those issues had been solved. But the fact is, the moment they change ministers, they reset back to the beginning. And the same happens with the moment they change directors of the Naval Ordnance or Third Sea Lords. They reset everything back to the beginning. And there are lots of issues about what is coming up. And there's an argument to be made about the directors of naval construction. But the thing is, the directors of naval construction don't have quite the same powers in a run-up to World War I that they do in about a run-up to World War II. And you can argue that the breaking of the power of the Director of Naval Construction, which happens in the 1960s, and the Third Sea Lord's power in the 1960s, is what's led to some of the issues we have with naval construction to this day. Because they reached their peak in about the late 1940s, early 1950s in terms of power. 40 years ago, sorry, yes. Trouble is, I watched it so much when I was younger because I had lived with such fans. I often make it seems less time ago in my mind. So ideally, there needs to be some Royal Navy own organised testing in 1906 or 1909, something which categorically shows the problems with shells in terms of quality control and actual capability. That is the point. That is what needs to be done. And that is an issue. It is an issue. Because if we think about it, getting that to work and getting that to be carried out is going to take time. It's also going to take a lot of effort and a lot of concerted political effort. And the thing is, pre-World War One, is there really the... how do I put this? The political will to push for it? So, those are our two options. Now, which scenario do you think I plumbed for? Which one do you think I felt was more likely and more viable? And why? Yes, British Battleships World War I by R.A. Burt. I think I have it somewhere, but I have the World War II one I could find, the World War I I couldn't find. Now, congratulations, Bertrand. I'm going to give you, let's say, 4 more tosses at a torpedo. So I've managed to 4 more after this to put it in the chat of which one you think and why. I didn't really catch that one. Whee! That one, although. Excellent, Bertrand. Nice everyone is going for both. Cured a 12-inch shell, then the 13.5-inch shell and 15-inch shell should fall in line. The thing about the Orion is that's the 13.5-inch shell, which is another reason why they could do it. That is the point. You know, the Orion class is when a 13.5-inch shell comes in, so it's when you have a chance, because you're already doing that, to do something. Match Dussel. The battle one. Mark Bresser. Mark Harness. Orion, because you're upgrading the guns and whole system and you'd think checking the system as you go. I'd go for Orion as being more realistic. Tosses a torpedo. Quite a method of timing. I thought it was good. Friendly Seaman. It would need a good media scandal. Something along the lines of greedy companies selling the Navy short. Because the British, as Stuart put, because British conservatism isn't changing tests without a source of pressure. Neither are British liberals. Honestly, if I was designing this in a perfect system, I would be going for the Orion class. I would be. And if I was prepared to change history, I would have to add in something like Abzalski saying a small war over something, Argentina or something over the Falklands. Something like that is what I need to implement for the British to actually go, oh, sugar, our shells aren't working. But because of the political system that we're dealing with, and because of the reality of that political system, I went with the pursuit of Goeben and Breslau. I actually thought this is more likely as a reality, a point of historical divergence, than the British political system actually admitting there was a problem with the shells without a war. This is the reality. This is the reality of what we're dealing with. As Manly 1640 has put, why design new shells? That takes time and costs money. Just make them how you always have. We have the biggest navy. No one is stupid enough to... Politicians. Yeah, it's basically, it goes like that. And also, it's very hard to tell everyone they're wrong and change the inertia of something as large as the British defence industrial complex at the time without physical evidence. Without something to point to. So, now the RN have a fire plan which always involves high explosive or CPC shells, particularly at long ranges, and saving the armour-piercing rounds for when they get closer to finish off the enemy. Now, this would do a lot of damage to superstructure, causes fires. The idea being to blind an enemy ship. Now, this is the scenario I can foresee if that order is not given. If those two capital ships are there, and we have to think about the two that would be involved. We are, talking about Indefatigable and Indomitable. The original formation that is sitting there, that is sitting in the place where Trowbridge runs into Goban, would have had Indomitable, Indefatigable, 5 cruisers and 8 destroyers. So suddenly that's a different scenario for Goban to run into. Goban and Breslau run into a force which has more firepower, a lot more firepower. And this, if it gets damaged enough that it ends up going into a Greek port, and again, if we consider its route, there's a lot of Greek islands and a lot of Greek territory for it to end up going into before it reaches the safety of the Ottoman Empire. And it could get caught by them very early on. As I see, also Trowbridge not getting literally sacked after going will make a difference for Craddock. There's all sorts of there are all sorts of issues and the things that change in this scenario, because if you don't have the scenario where Craddock is going to feel like Trowbridge would get sacked, because again you would have Goban and Breslau running into, as I've just mentioned, a battle order which includes Indefatigable and Indomitable. Now, they aren't the greatest ships in the world. They are, they're the second generation 12-inch battle cruisers. They are, well, one of them's second generation, one of them's actually first generation. They are capable of 26, 25 knots. Goban, theoretically he says, is capable of 25.5 knots, so theoretically could outrun them. Well, theoretically could outrun Indefatigable, but probably couldn't outrun Indomitable. But honestly, it's not got enough speed to be able to really outrun them. Half a knot is probably not going to get it up to there, especially when it's got to get past them. So it's probably going to get damaged. It's going to be trying to get away, not trying to fight a battle. So it gets damaged, and this is the basis of our alternative history and where things go. Goeben gets damaged. Goeben ends up going into a Greek port, and the British get to inspect the damage. And be able to then turn around and go, yeah, we've proven that you haven't been testing this armour properly like you've been telling us, companies. It's not our fault, it's you. Because look, we've now seen it against this armour of this German battlecruiser. We've seen the damage. We know you've got it wrong. Change it. If it had high-grade British coal, it has a half-knot advantage on one of the battlecruisers. It won't have high-grade British coal. It has fairly decent Austrian coal in it, but its engines aren't going to work out that well. Now, originally, what happens historically, of course, is that some bright spark called Sturdy and Churchill, back in the Admiralty, have suddenly this fear of, what happens if it goes for the Atlantic? Oh, no! And so they move the two battle cruisers away from this battle group, which would have been waiting for it, and send them off to the other side of Sicily. And then, of course, it runs the other way to Constantinople. And then they've got them trying to catch it. And, of course, they've got all pretty much the same top speed, so none of them can catch it at this point. Whilst it can't get away, it also can't be caught. And historically, in this scenario though, it does get caught because I'm not sure. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Sturdy forgets to send the signal, maybe Churchill forgets to send the signal, maybe they both go out and actually find a bottle of scotch which makes them both so drunk they can't do anything that week. I don't know, but whatever happens, they don't manage to do this. Southgate, did David Lloyd George have anything to do with naval shells? I know as Minister of Munitions, this led to the solving the Army shell shortage, but also a dud rate of 30% plus. Not at the beginning of World War One. There's also the question there is the question of why the Austro-Hungarian fleet doesn't sortie to cover Goeben. In nicest way, by the time she's gone into Greek port, she's too far away for the Austrians to get to her. Remember, they have to get through the Italians. And also, to be fair, the Austrians aren't keen on sacrificing their entire fleet to go and save one German battlecruiser. CPC shells are... Oh, lemon. Remember the things. Capped shells. It's something... yeah, British naval shells. British CPC shells. Now... basically, there are all sorts of different types of shell which the British have various phraseologies for, and some books call it classify it as high explosive, some call it common pointed capped, some call it common pointed. So I've put in there one of the two most common designations I've found. But CPC shells are common pointed capped shells, theoretically. There are some new emojis appearing, which I haven't seen before. My coach, read Austrians have to get through these homes. Aren't they at least still neutral this time? They're neutral, but they're neutral in the version of we really don't like the Austrians. So whilst there's also the French fleet and various other things sitting around there, the Italians are really not keen on the Austrians coming out in fleet formation. Plus, there's the fact that the Austrian ships, if I remember correctly, they don't really have a lot available at this point, and none of which are going to catch up with this engagement. The Italians were supposed to be allied to the Axis, but were neutral, and were neutral as kind of in the form of they really didn't like the Austrians. It's the kind of neutrality where, yes, we're neutral. We're neutral. What is the difference between capped, ballistic, capped, and CPC? Okay, so common pointed capped. Now, this is an interesting one because I would normally say that CPC shells, as they're classified and as the British call them, don't really come about till World War II. But some people date them and go, well, no, these shells were called CPC shells, and it's an interesting point of it's a whole extra video, basically, Melanie, to answer that question. In fact, I am considering tomorrow is either going to be recorded a comment response video, which I'm going to record early tomorrow morning, or it's going to be a video on shell types, because I am just sitting there going, there are just so many different designations for shell types. So many different types. So, shell types. I now know which one Melanie's rooting for, as tomorrow's not a common response video, it's a shell type video. So, knock-ons. Now, I've put down 3 major ones, but of course, you've already pointed out the 4th one, which would be an effect on the Battle of Coronel, because without Trowbridge being treated like he is after the failure in the pursuit of Goeben and Breslau, Craddock might act differently. He might feel that he's going to be allowed more ability to operate. There's also a scenario that actually, when they find a concentration of forces work better, they might send him a battle cruiser. You know, those battle cruisers might actually come down. He might actually get reinforcements. Someone might send him HMS Defence. She might actually arrive with Craddock in time instead of being put off in another pennypack somewhere. You know, it's just amazing the sheer number of permutations which might happen for Craddock, which could change the entire Falklands. Anyway, so, for starters, Goeben and Breslau don't get there, then the Ottoman Empire doesn't get a battlecruiser, or the warning events which lead up to Gallipoli historically. Which could change the outcome, because if there's no Goeben gone through the Dardanelles, then why shut it on the 3rd of November 1914? Why turn up and shut it? So no one tells the Ottomans exactly how dangerous they were, how lacking in protection the Dardanelles are, and which might mean that later on when you turn up you can force it and actually get through. With the knowledge and effectiveness of the shells, expect 2 things. Firstly, the idea of firing more shells to increase chance of doing damage to catch on more widely than it did historically. Although with Jellicoe in charge, don't expect the ground fleet to also not still concentrate on accuracy. It might even force a re-evaluation of battlecruiser forces training earlier than Dogger Bank than historically, because now, with the shells they have proving not as good and not as reliable in going off, the importance of actually hitting the target with a shell is going to be even more important. It's going to go up. So the idea of we have to get a greater volume of shells into the air, but we also have to be more likely to actually hit our target, is going to be first and foremost, and that's going to affect the Royal Navy in the next 18 months. So that's going to have a knock-on impact for things like Dogger Bank, etc. So that might change the whole scenario for Dogger Bank. Jonik, I think Drac said CBC. You're talking about CBC. I'm talking about CPC shells. So, please note again, you are completely right. There is CBC shells, but there's also CPC shells. Yeah. I know what's happening. There are people probably sitting there going, but why? Why? Yes. Yes. So, John UK, you are perfectly right about where CBC shells come. CPC shells are not CBC shells. No worries. No. It's completely understandable. You are. Let's put it this way. I have a list next to me on one of my screens of from somewhere I've scanned from a book of shells, and it's long, and it's not a book I'm supposed to be using in terms of scan versions because it's not been published yet, but a friend of mine sent it to me, and all the terminology and shell terminology which the British used. And I kid you not, 18 pages for the Royal Navy alone. So, do not worry about this. Secondly, it will lead to development of the improved shells, either Greenboy or Greenboy-esque. Namely because Jellicoe, Beatty and Milne, who had all previously been campaigning... This is one saving grace for Beatty. Guess what? He did campaign for better shells. And he had done before World War I. As had Jellicoe, as had Milne. And all three of these characters would have been involved. Well, at the moment you have a cannon emoji. If you're one of my... subscribers... Not subscribers. I think if you're one of the people who... I'm not sure... on that, you have this emoji. I am working on a whole new generation, a set of emojis. As I get more subscribers and more people on people who are signed up to support us on YouTube, I have got more emojis for here, and I'm also developing more emojis for Twitch as well. Okay. Ooh, I can have... I just found a poll. Ooh. I found a poll. I can do polling now on chat. Oh, I'm going to be using this. Right. So, thirdly, if no Goban and no warning to the November 1914... then the force sent to Gallipoli either might not be there so long or require HMS Queen Elizabeth in the first place. Now, that has an impact because that could well mean there's an extra 15-inch gun ship at Jutland. That's the Daedalus, a science fiction ship, Jos Funk. If Goban's sunk and Craddock victorious, does Battenberg stay as first Sea Lord? Ooh, that's another interesting scenario, Michael Cooch. Potentially. Potentially he does, potentially he doesn't. There's certainly a scenario which still sees Fisher brought back because of the sheer amount of time that Battenberg is having to stay, having to defend his name. I think that probably still comes up because Fisher's still stirring up that trouble in the press. So I think the odds are... Oh, Melly 6040, just noticed. May not have had a refresh by interval. I now have the option to time out other mods. Okay, mods behave. Melanie can time you out now. YouTube might have taken a while to catch up. I think probably Battenberg does still go, but I think it's going to depend on what happens at Coronel, if Coronel happens, and if HMS Defence is sent to join them. Because there's for that, I think if Coronel happens, I think still Battenberg goes, and Coronel could still happen. It could still work out that way. Craddock could still be lulled into thinking he's engaging one German ship and there's actually the whole fleet there, and that scenario still works out. So yeah. Battenberg, that's a whole butterfly off. That's many, many butterflies away. But there again, Battenberg might also find himself further entrenched, because if it turns out British shells are bad, then the odds are Fisher can get some of that blame, because the shells have been known to be bad for a long time. And the governments might push the blame onto Fisher. So, who knows? Well, that is the other point you have to start thinking about. British order of battle under a new scenario at Jutland. Well, the 12-inch shells, they had the problem of passing through ships without going off. This is what we find the 12-inch shells did. They actually passed through some of the German ships. The 13.5-inch and 15-inch shells had a problem of exploding prematurely. And so, the affected ships of the order of battle. Well, you've got a 2 Revenge class. You could have 5 Queen Elizabeth class all there, because HMS Queen Elizabeth in the scenario probably doesn't need to go to. Let's be honest. Why do they need to take a Queen Elizabeth class dreadnought to go to Gallipoli at this point? They don't, especially with the forts in that state. Especially when you have the thing turn up. The troops would turn up at the same time as the ships. They'd probably push through, and they probably would actually make it through. So Gallipoli might well. Here's the thing. That's another point of history. You might not have Gallipoli be the historic draw campaign and terrible scenario it is. It could actually succeed. Churchill could be considered a strategic genius because Gallipoli pays off. Let's all think about that one. Okay? Under this scenario, Goeben and Breslau get caught and Gallipoli possibly succeeds, at which point he is considered a strategic genius. Okay, it's a good job Paul from Chicago is not watching this live at the moment, because if he was, he would be currently very upset with me about saying this. The 96 they don't have Goeben and Breslau to help. And Goeben and Breslau, if they're in Greece, are not going to the Ottomans, because the Greeks are not part of the Ottoman Empire. And as said, Turkey may stay neutral, as Michael Hooch points out. So then you don't need to do Gallipoli at all. In which case, you're still sending supplies through to Russia, through the Straits of the Dardanelles. Hey! Churchill might become Prime Minister instead of Lloyd George if Gallipoli takes place and it succeeds. Now, scenarios we have to therefore deal with. We have got we could have as many as 7 15-inch gun ships there. We have a single 14-inch gun ship, HMS Canada. We'd have 15 13.5-inch gun ships. Now, interesting enough, we currently have it listed as 15 12-inch gun ships here. But that does require that Indomitable and Indefatigable get through their fight with Goeben and Breslau intact. They probably do, because Goeben is running away. But, you know. as a scenario. There are all sorts of permutations from this Bichon. It's one of those small little butterflies. You change that one signal, you change the course of events over hundreds of years, over the next century. And please do think about this, because too often when I talk about the Greenboys or we talk about shells, people just think about the 15-inch gun ships. No. Every single one of these ships have problems with their shells. Every single one of these ships. I could also list the cruisers in here, because their shells are affected. And the destroyers. The shell problems for the Royal Navy are universal across all types and all sizes. So, once you start doing proper testing of shells, where do you stop? You don't. You test them all. And that's one of the things that's often forgotten about the Greenboy. One of the things which actually hold up the Greenboy's deployment is because they start testing more and more guns. And they go down, they go, oh, perhaps this problem's just with the 15-inch shells. No, it's not. Okay. But we'll test the 13.5-inch. Oh, sugar. They're just as bad. Well, it's not going to be a problem with 12-inch shells. We've had them around forever. They're fine, aren't they? They're fine. Oh, frigate. 9.2-inch shells? Sugar. 7.5-inch shells? Sugar. 6-inch shells? Frigating, sugaring, cruisering, battleships. HMS Dreadnought is still not part of the Battle of Jutland, because historically, she is now with the Channel Fleet. HMS, speaking of flag change history and something else, so in this battle, does Jellicoe get more information? No. I'm not going to change anything else historically, because the moment there's one change, and that's already change enough. One broken radio transmitter makes Churchill Prime Minister. Yep. Mr. That could be it. What are you? Right. Now, I could have been really naughty in this scenario, and I could have said that the collision between HMS New Zealand and HMS Australia didn't happen. And this would give the British another 12-inch gunship for a total of 39 Dreadnoughts form ships versus 21 Dreadnought form and 6 pre-Dreadnought types. It's a lot of extra firepower once you start adding in these things. I'm not. And mention also HMS Dreadnought is off with the Channel Squadron. Now, this is going to change things, because it's going to change every single phase of the battle if the battle goes as the phases did. And I would like to start raising this point now. The Germans are very risk adverse. So if the Germans start losing ships earlier in the battle, they could well break off and try and break for home earlier. This is a scenario which has to be considered. I might well be running that poll because apparently my water tastes funny this evening. I'm not sure why. So, and that is a picture of Warspite and Valiant for the battlecruiser runs, but that's because, honestly, they're two of my favourite ships in the running. And this is something you have to start thinking about. Where is Queen Elizabeth going to be if she's back here? Because that was the first thing. Once I started doing that, I went, hang on, Goblin's not in Turkey. So you don't get that. So even if Turkey becomes a problem and they end up deciding they have to invade it anyway for Dardanelles, they're not prepared. So they might well win. Or, alternatively, they don't do anything. Either way, that means an extra Queen Elizabeth class is now available back in the UK. Where is she going to be? Is she going to be with 5th Battle Squadron? Could be. Well, that's going to have an impact on 5th Battle Squadron because you now have 5 of the 15-inch gunships. Or is she going to be being used as Jellicoe's flagship? It's not without precedence. Yes, he had so far Ketwa and Duke, but that allows him to keep a full squadron of Queen Elizabeth class together in 5th Battle Squadron. If there's a 5th vessel going around, why not use it? And Queen Elizabeth is set up to be a flagship. So, we have the battlecruiser runs. Now, the battlecruiser runs. As we know, at around 1400 hours on the 31st of May 1916, there is contact between BT ships and Hipper's squadron. Now, at around 4:30, the 5th Battle Squadron is roughly 5 miles behind and slightly to the northwest on the side, unengaged side of the battlecruiser force. Now, at about 4:30, BT turns around east and then turns north to meet, turns, it's about 260 miles east of Britain, and then turns north to meet Jellicoe. Sorry, I've got a whole load of notes here and I've really got to stop squiggling over them. This is why I should just have reprinted it out and rewritten it. At 2:20 hours, 14:20 hours, the scouts of BT's force report enemy ships to the southeast. Whilst investigating a Danish steamer, the NJ Fjord, which was stopped between the two fleets, they found 2 German destroyers engaged on the same mission. And these are the first shots of the battle. They're fired at 14:28 hours, when Galatea and Phaeton of the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron attacked the German torpedo boats. These then withdrew toward their own approaching light cruisers. At 14:36 hours, the Germans scored the first hit of the battle when SMS Elbing, which was, of course, a light cruiser originally ordered by the Russians, and Rear Admiral Frederick Brodecker's scouting group number 2 managed to hit Galatea at extreme range, much to her and Galatea's surprise. Beatty therefore began to move his battlecruisers and supporting forces southeastwards and then eastwards to try and cut the German ships off from their base, and ordered Engadine to launch a seaplane to try to get more information and seize the location of the German forces. This would be the first battle in which aeroplanes were to be launched from organically from ships in order to try and carry out reconnaissance. Engadine's aircraft did locate and report the German light cruisers before 15:30 hours, but came under anti-aircraft gunfire, and attempts to relay reports from the airplane failed. Now, and this is often put as unfortunate, but let's be honest, it's bad staff work. Initial course changes at 14:32 hours had not been received by Hugh Evan Thomas's 5th Battle Squadron. This was because the distance was too great to read the flags. So someone should have tried a radio message, but there again, that could have been heard by the enemy. So you can understand the thinking of why they didn't, but... And this is because the last battle cruiser in the line, which was HMS Tiger, was no longer in a position where she could relay signals by searchlight to Evan Thomas, as she'd been previously ordered to do so. Before the north turn, Tiger being closest ship to Evan Thomas, she was now further away than Beatty and Lion, and so therefore Lion should have taken over the visual signalling to Thomas, but didn't, still expecting Tiger to be relaying it. Now, this is of course aggravated by the fact that Evan Thomas had not been briefed by BT, and so had no idea of what his normal squadron standing orders were. And so the Queen Elizabeth class end up 10 miles behind rather than 5. He'd also, of course, BT, as in his Bright Sparks, had, instead of proceeding at the best speed of his his battleships, had of course had gone on along at full speed, and this had of course been what had caused the issue and divided the forces. Now, this is what cost them their advantage in the first roughly half hour of the battle. Visibility favoured the Germans, and so the Hipper's force sighted BT squadron at a range of about 15 miles, that's 13 nautical miles, at 15:22 hours. But BT's forces didn't identify Hipper's battlecruisers until 15:30 hours, so about 8 minutes later. At 15:45 hours, Hipper decided to turn southeast to lead BT towards Shear, who was 46 miles, that's 40 nautical miles, southeast, with the main force of the High Seas Fleet. Now, Beatty holds his fire for 10 minutes with the German ships in range. He didn't use this time to rearrange his battle cruisers into a fighting formation. And he didn't do anything at all to prepare them for actual combat. He has 15 minutes which he could have used before fighting to have actually prepared his ships, but he doesn't. At 1548, none of this therefore is changed by having Greenboys, because Beatty's still gonna Beatty. Thank you, Leslie. Well, you always find things hard to hear in hospitals. Anyway, but yeah, my granddad actually got some headphones for hospitals, but I don't think you still get the wire, cabled headphones properly anymore. Anyway, at 1548 hours, with the forces roughly 14 miles or 15,000 yards apart, the British to the southwest of the Germans, Hipper opens fire. Then the British ships start opening fire as their guns bear upon their targets. And this begins what is of course known as the run to the south. Now, during the first minutes of the ensuing battle, all the British ships except Princess Royal fired over their German opponents. This is due to adverse visibility conditions, before finally getting the range. Only Lion and Princess Royal had settled into formation, so the other four ships were hampered in aiming by their own turning. And Beatty was to the windward of Hipper, and therefore funnel and gun smoke from his own ships tended to obscure his targets, while Hipper's smoke blew clear. Also, eastern sky was overcast, and grey German ships were indistinct and difficult to arrange at that range. Now, Beatty had ordered his ships to engage in a line, and with one British ship engaging one German, and his flagship HMS Lion doubling on the German flagship Lutzow. This is important to remember for later. Now, this is where there's another mistake in signalling by flag. And this is possibly because Queen Mary and Tiger were both unable to see the German lead ship because of smoke. The second German ship, the Flinger, was left unengaged and free to fire without disruption. Molt drew fire from two of Beatty's battle cruisers, but still fired during this time, managing to hit Tiger 9 times in the first 12 minutes. As a result, the Germans drew first blood. Hipper's 5 battlecruisers quickly registered hits on 3 of the 6 British battlecruisers. 7 minutes passed before the British managed to score their first hit. Now, the first near kill on the run south, though, occurs at 1600 hours, when a 12-inch shell from Lutzow wrecks Q turret on HMS Lion. Unluckily, Major Francis Harvey of the Royal Marines ordered magazine doors shut and the magazines flooded. There were lots of the mortally wounded Major Francis Harvey of the Royal Marines, and this prevented the magazine exploding at 1628 hours when a flash fire ignited and basically killed everyone in the chambers outside Q magazine as well. Indefatigable, not so lucky. 14 minutes into the gunner exchange, she's hit by 3 shells from Von der Tann, causing sufficient damage to knock her out of the line and detonating X magazine aft. Soon after, near maximum range, Von der Tann put another 28cm shell, that's 11-inch shell, into an Naval's A turret forward, and these plunging shells pierced the upper armour, and she's ripped apart by another magazine explosion, sinking immediately and leaving only 2 survivors from a crew of 1,019. That's not going to change, is it? Now, unfortunately, Hipper's position deteriorates quite a lot at 15 hours, because 5th Battle Squadron comes into range. And these 4 battleships are astern, and they have very long-range guns. Now, at 1608, HMS Barham catches up to Hipper and opens fire at about maximum range, scoring, please note, a 15-inch hit on Von der Tann within 60 seconds. Now, the thing is, the Queen Elizabeth class battleships have got the best gunnery officers in the Royal Navy, have got the best gunnery systems in the Royal Navy, and the best guns in the Royal Navy. Now, if you consider how Von der Tann is hit by a 15-inch shell within 60 seconds, it doesn't really get much better than that for Von der Tann. Now, Von der Tann was hit several points during the battle. Von der Tann was hit by a 50-centimeter shell which struck beneath the waterline, dislodged a section of belt armor, but didn't go off, and this caused her to fall out of line to port. Now, at 17:20 hours, a 13.5-inch shell from Tiger struck the barbette of Von der Tann's A turret. A chunk of armor plate is dislodged from inside the turret and struck the turret training gear, which jammed to the turret at 120 degrees. This put the turret out of action for the engagement, but again, it had gone off outside the turret. It hadn't penetrated. At 17:23 hours, it's hit by another 13.5-inch shell from Tiger, which struck near the C turret and killed 6 men. This shell held the deck and created enough wreckage that the turret was unable to traverse. And starboard rudder engine room was damaged. Now, the explosion and the burning fire, etc., of her obscured the ship at this point, which meant that New Zealand, which had been engaging Von der Tann following Indefatigable's destruction, lost sight of target and shifted fire to Malta. But at 17:18 hours, the range from Von der Tann to Barham was close to 17,500 yards, which Von der Tann decided to open fire on the British battleships, which was pretty darn stupid. She registered a hit on Barham, and then started to return her fire to New Zealand because her fore and aft turrets had since been disabled, and her midships turret was no longer able to target Barham. And it gets worse. Honestly, Von der Tann should possibly have been sunk. Possibly have been sunk. Probably been sunk. She certainly gets hit by enough shells. So there's the first thing. Von der Tann, if you've got better shells, doesn't survive. Sherman, sorry if somewhat on a tangent, but how many Greenboy shells could be manufactured in 18 months? How many expended in Australia? It's considered it took 18 months in wartime using these facilities they had, which didn't really change much for battleship shells production, to produce enough for the Grand Fleet to be all outfitted in with them and have them for training, etc. So that's the timing we're going to, because that's historically what happened. Sean, I can understand your question, but if we go back to here, the timeline used is based on the actual timeline for Greenboys, and they were introduced with 18 months of wartime. So you could actually take it down even less, because they have the orders for trial shells on May 1917. and mass production of shells has started December 1917, and it's April 1918 by the point they're out. So, honestly, you could say 11 months. I have taken it all up to 18 months to give timing for various things and it to go slowly, but I could have gone less than a year. Adrian just looked at Major in Tiger Ski turret was awarded Victoria Cross. Yep. Oh, they'd have all had the new shells. When I'm giving those stats, I'm giving stats to them actually putting new shells in every battle. You have to consider the sheer size of marine industry and defence industry which the British had then. It's not like today. It was literally a case of you will remake the shells, and they will all be working on it. Now, Von der Tann is not the only one in trouble, because at 1625, HMS Queen Mary is hit by what would have been a combined salvo from Deflinger and Seydlitz. She then disintegrates with forward magazine explodes. However, Deflinger and Seydlitz had themselves both been hit quite a lot beforehand. So there is a very real chance that if we go to Deflinger and Seydlitz, sorry, this is the joy of having quite so many different stats up. Now, if we consider the Battle of now, Seydlitz is hit about 1800 hours by a shell from either Barham or Valiant. But whilst they were able to concentrate on Queen Mary earlier at 1725, she had actually been hit a lot earlier. Between 1655 and 1657, she was struck by 2 shells from Queen Mary. The first shell penetrated the side of the ship 5 feet above the main deck and caused a number of small fires. The second shell penetrated the barbette of the after superfiring turret. It ignited 4 propellant charges, which caused a flash fire, but it didn't go off itself. So, again, Seydlitz has been hit quite a lot. Seydlitz is actually in a duel with Queen Mary. Now, her secondary battery had managed to enter the fray because the range had got down to 12,900 yards. And in fact, her secondary battery starts to engage some of the British destroyers at some points. But this is the point you have to start thinking about. Yes, Queen Mary gets blown up. When? She gets blown up at roughly 1725. But she could have actually blown up Seydlitz half an hour earlier. She might still get blown up because there's, well, no, Deflinger half an hour earlier. Hang on. Oh no, Seydlitz. Sorry. Wrong tab. I've got all my notes sitting here on various savings. And now, so when Queen Mary is hit, she's struck by 5 shells from 2 salvos from Seydlitz and Deflinger when she's destroyed. Well, if you take out Seydlitz, that's going to reduce that one. I was asking, wouldn't this be the same situation as coordinate? No, because the shells have been found to be bad. This is the scenario you're dealing with. The shells have been found to be bad, have proven to be bad, so they would have replaced them. If you consider the older shells, they presumed they were just as good, so they might as well use them. But if you realise the shells are bad, you replace them, which is what the British do. The British basically spend... I've given them 18 months as my timeline to make it conservative, but they actually achieve it pretty much within 12 months, and they basically go everything to change over because the shells are bad. Jellicoe would continue Go-Go-Lander. He wouldn't be... in the nicest way, that doesn't really bother... Jellicoe is not going to stop because BT's losing ships. Now, the Flinger... you can say a lucky ship, but the Battle of Jutland is not good for her. She's being left out and slowly not being hit. But following the damage inflicted by Lutzow on Lion, the Flinger lost sight of the British ship, so at 1716 out shifted her fire to Queen Mary. She engages that. Now, between 1809 and 1819 hours, the Flinger becomes the target from either Barham or Valiant. We're not quite sure which one, but she's hit by a shell. And then she's hit by another 15-inch shell. And the first shell goes off prematurely, and the second shell strikes the bow and tears a hole that allowed some 300 tons of water in the ship, but again, didn't blow up. So, the Flinger could have had 2 very nasty hits by 15-inch shells. At 1900 hours, Wiesbaden, a cruiser, becomes disabled by a shell from Invincible, and the German battle cruisers make a 16-point turn to the northeast and head for the crippled cruiser at high speed. They then spot HMS Defence. Hipper hesitates to engage because initially he thinks it's the Rostock, which is a German cruiser, but at 1916 hours, Lutzow's commander ordered Captain Zasihara ordered his ship to open fire. The fence is struck by several heavy caliber shells from the German ships, and, well, one of them penetrates her ammunition magazines and that causes her to blow up. It's not a fun time. So, the Flinger won't... She had 2 nasty hits that didn't blow up, and they get 300 tons of water in the hull. Imagine what happens if a nastier hit takes in place. The memoir of the gunnery officer, the Flinger, is pretty darn good. So... now, at 1626 hours, a salvo struck HMS Princess Royal. And she's obscured by spray. And, well... actually, no, let's go through this sort of... So, the German battlecruisers made an estimated total of 42 hits on the British battlecruisers. 9 on Lion, 6 on Princess Royal, 7 on Queen Mary, 14 on Tiger, 1 on New Zealand, 5 on Indefatigable. Right? On the run south. And 2 more on Barham. There were 11 hits by British battle cruisers, 4 on Lutzow, 4 on Seydlitz and 2 on Moltke, 1 on Von der Tam, and 6 15-inch hits by the battleships, 1 on Seydlitz, 4 on Moltke, and 1 on Von der Tam. There are also hits on Der Flinger, which are not included in that list. Why not? We know there's at least 2 hits on Der Flinger. There are other hits on Seydlitz. And, oh no, that's just between 1548 hours and 1654 hours. There is that. There are those hits. There are more hits on Der Flinger, etc. and other times. There are a lot of hits on the ships, on each ship. The consistency of the scenario in the run to the south is that the British battle cruisers and the British battleships, they're all suffering because their guns and their shells aren't blowing up. Now, it's always nice when my own notes confuse me. This is why I should have more sensible notes. At 1630 hours, Shear's battleships sight the battlecruiser action. And HMS Southampton, of the 2nd Light Cruiser Squadron, with Commodore William Goodenough in charge of that squadron, sighted the main body of Shear's High Sea Fleet, dodging heavy caliber salvos to report in detail the German strength. 16 dreadnoughts with 6 pre-dreadnoughts. This was, of course, the first news that Beatty and Jellicoe had that Shear and his battle fleet were even at sea. Whilst this was going on, an all-out destroyer action rages quite merrily between the opposing battlecruiser forces, as the British and German destroyers, ignoring completely their large charges, were just trying to fight each other to the end. Both battlecruiser forces turned away from torpedoes and all accepted escaped harm apart from Seydlitz, which was hit forward at 1657 by a torpedo fired by HMS Petard. She starts taking on water but maintains speed. The destroyer in command of the force is HMS Nestor, under the command of Captain Barry Bingham. The British disabled torpedo boat V-27, and the Germans abandoned Signet. Petard then torpedoed and sank V-29, her second hit of the day. And S-35 and V-26 rescued the cruiser their sunken sisters. Unfortunately, both HMS Nestor and HMS Nomad were immobilized by shell hits and later sunk by Shear's passing dreadnoughts. Bingham was rescued and awarded the Victoria Cross for his leadership of the destroyer action. So, we now have the run to the north. As soon as he sighted the vanguard of Shear's battle line, 12 miles, that's 10 nautical miles away, at 1640 hours, Beatty turns his battlecruiser force 180 degrees to race north towards Jellicoe. Beatty, once again, fails to signal to 5th Battle Squadron. So, they were passing the battlecruisers, going in the opposite direction, and basically, at this point, 5th Battle Squadron were heading towards the German battle fleet solo. Fifth Battle Squadron start to engage the German battleships. The difficulties of 5th Battle Squadron are then made worse because Beatty gives the order to Evan Thomas to turn in succession rather than turn together at 1648 as the battleships passed him. Evan Thomas acknowledged the signal, but then Seymour doesn't haul down the flags, the signal to execute the signal. for some minutes. So you put the signal up, and then you're supposed to haul them down to tell your ships to execute them. He doesn't do this. So Evan Thomas issues his own flag command, warning his squadron to expect some maneuvers and to follow his lead before starting to turn on his own initiative. Basically, Evan Thomas is going, I am not charging to my death to save you, BT. I am saving my ships. Thank the Lord for Evan Thomas. Everyone say, all hail Evan Thomas. He needs to it. Seriously, there is another admiral, kind of like Admiral Duncan, who doesn't get enough appreciation. Now, the order to turn in succession would, of course, resulted in all 4 ships turning in the same patch of sea, and would have given the High Seas Fleet an amazing opportunity. However, Malaya, the trailing ship, decided to turn early, which mitigated results. And for the next hour after this, 5th Battle Squadron acted as the rear guard, drawing fire from all the German ships were in range. And so, while by 17:10 hours, BT had managed to ease his own squadron out of range of Hipper's now superior in strength battlecruiser force, the 5th Battle Squadron was still taking the fight to the Germans. It's one of those interesting things. Jellicoe gets the 3 battlecruisers, chucked them, and goes, you know, you lost these ships. And it's a case of they're all lost when BT's in charge. Hello, Dan Freeman. Now, BT's battlecruisers do not score any hits on the Germans until about 1745 now. But they got 5 more hits in this time from the Germans because of range and issues. However, at this point, 5th Battle Squadron started to receive simultaneous fire from both Hipper's battlecruisers to the east, because they couldn't reach the British battlecruisers because they got out of range, which were helpfully engaged by Barham and Valiant, and Shear's leading battleships to the southeast, which HMS Warspite and Malaya decided were theirs. So basically, the division goes, the battleships of 5th Battle Squadron decide, right then, Barham, Valiant, battlecruisers, yours. Warspite and Malaya go, come on, Germany, we're taking on your entire High Seas Fleet. 3 of them take hits. 4 from the Flinger hit Barham. Warspite took 2. Malaya, 7 by the German battleships. Valiant emerged unscathed. And the 15-inch shells of the 4 battleships were very accurate and effective. They scored 13 hits at minimum. 4 on Lutzow, 3 on the Flinger, 6 on Seydlitz, and 5 on battleships. 1 on the SMS Magrath is the only one which does serious damage, because again they failed to go off. And Magrath gets actually quite badly hit by a single shell. The hit at 18:10 hours struck on a joint between 2 8-inch Fink sidearm plates. The shell burst entirely on impact and holed the armour. The main deck was buckled. 400 tons of water entered the ship. The other 2 shells she's hit by have failed to explode and caused negligible impact. So imagine if all 3 shells had been properly penetrating shells and had gone into the ship and gone off. Imagine what damage happened to that ship. The Germans could have lost battleships, they could have lost everything in the run to the north, facing off the Queen Elizabeth. In which case, there is a very real scenario right, at this point, that these are where the Battle of Jutland ends. That the Germans turn south immediately because they're losing ships to the Queen Elizabeth class, and they go away. Okay? They've sprung their trap, they're chasing BT, but they're losing ships. And they can't afford to lose ships even more than they can't afford to lose ships, okay? They're already outnumbered by the British. Losing any ships causes them to have a real problem. So at this point, they could well be turning around because of 5th Battle Squadron. So, honestly, looking at that list, I would say if Lutzow, Derflinger, and Seydlitz are not sunk, and possibly Magrath, at this point, I would be surprised. It would have been sunk by this point. I would be very surprised. Because let's be honest, if you've got 3 solid 15-inch shell hits on Derflinger, she should be in a real trouble. Lutzow, 6 on Seydlitz. That thing should have gone sky high. Lutzow we know sinks, and she ends up getting scuttled by torpedoes being fired into her to make her sink. But still, all 3 of those ships should have been sunk if the shells had been working properly. And they get 5 hits on German battleships, 3 of which are on Magrath. So if the Germans had lost 3 battle cruisers at this point, and a battleship, what goes through Scheer's brain? Does he go, I'm going to carry on? Or does he go, I'm turning for home? Hipper's dead, remember? Hipper would be dead because Hipper was aboard his flagship, Lutzow, at this point. And this is, of course, with 4. This is as it historically happens. If you have Queen Elizabeth here as well. Now, I've mentally decided that, honestly, if I put her in this point in an engagement, then it becomes too dramatic. But if you did have Queen Elizabeth along at this point as well, you would have 5 15-inch ships. If they're armed with improved shells, which are firing shells which will go off on the right time, those shells are the most powerful guns the Royal Navy has. They're the longest range guns they have. They have the best fire control systems the Royal Navy have, and they have the best gunnery crews the Royal Navy can get outside of those aboard HMS Iron Duke, because Jellicoe trains those personally. And I mean literally personally. He was known to go and sit in the turrets and have long conversations with the turret crews that they couldn't run away from. It would be literally a case of BT ran away, leaving the field, and Evan Thomas drove off the German fleet and sent them home. That would be the narrative which would come home. It would not do well for BT's career at this point. BT doesn't get a column, because BT's running away, remember? The Germans run away from 5th Battle Squadron, which he's left behind. It would be possibly Evan Thomas who gets the column in Trafalgar Square. No, I think they would be losses. Honestly, if we consider Magrath and the damage she's done, she is hit by 1 shell which doesn't go off. At 1810, let's see. She's hit by 1810. That shell strikes a joint between 2 8-inch fixed-side armour plates, and the shell bursts on impact and holds the armour. This buckles the main deck, and 400 tons of water enters the ship. If the other 2 shells, which hit similarly vital places, damage the ship and actually go off after they've penetrated like they're supposed to, not on actual contact with the outside of the ship, that makes massive holes in the ship, and we're probably talking thousands of tons of water into the ship. So Magrath sinks, or is at least slowed down to the point at which, again, the Germans are trying to run away with very slow ships at that point. Which is another reason why they might end up scuttling them, because it might be a Lutzow scenario where they just don't think they can get, where it's just not going to get home, so they have to sink it in order to try so that stop the British capturing it and to get home, to try and get away from the British. BT's career is supported by powerful friends, but BT's career is not, and as there is an old saying, if you lose those who lose the king's colours lose the king's friendship. And if you lose the king's friendship, you have no friends at court. That's, of course, repeated in Sharp has made a thing for the very interesting colonel he gets at one point. But, you know, life happens. Nice. Won't the demises of indefatigable Queen Mary von der Tann, Seydlitz, Lutzow, and Derflinger not cause the same? Oh, there would be so much nonsense about battle cruisers, but honestly, the fast battleships would be seen as the victory. So what you would get is the fast battleships would come about sooner. It would be a case of, instead of it being the Admiral class being battle cruisers, they would be fast battleships. In fact, Renown and Repulse would be the last battle cruisers built. It would be fast. Admiral class would be fast battleships. They wouldn't be a battle cruiser. So how many Queen Elizabeths were ordered after this battle? Improved Queen Elizabeths will be ordered after this battle. Queen Elizabeth which could actually do 28 knots. And Queen Elizabeth which could actually carry... Queen Elizabeth which would probably carry even bigger guns. Or more 12-inch, more 15-inch guns. I'm not sure. Now, I've just found the polling option. I'm going to start using it. Yes, so far seems to be the options coming in. Oh, oh. 82%. Yes, appears to be in the win, but it's only 82% of the vote. Agincourt by this point has been cancelled. Kirkland, technically speaking, I don't think 5th Battle Squadron ever got the order to turn, so in the case of Queen Elizabeth drive a high seas fleet off on the BT's orders, so BT still gets all the credit. Don't think me, I was kidding. We won't. Are we saying Hood would be 30 knots with improved deck armor? Hood would be a 28 knot Super Queen Elizabeth class. She would be a battleship. She would be a fast battleship. She would not be a battle cruiser. BT gallantly drew the German fleet into Evan Thomas's guns, showing BT's tactical genius, according to his memoir. Who knows? Chris Alpha, if the Germans run for home early, would there be a round 2 before the Germans reach Jade? Potentially. The thing is, it depends how if they've got sunk ships or damaged ships. For the Germans, they want to have sunk ships. It sounds terrible, they lose a lot of lives, but they lose a lot less lives, because if they have sunk ships, they can maintain their speed and probably get home safely. If they have damaged ships, which they're having to protect and go slowly, then you have a scenario which, kind of like the Battle of Cape Matapan, where the British are going to be getting closer and closer and closer, and you're not able to run away or maneuver. Right then, I think the poll results are in, and I think it's... Yes, 37 votes. Yes, I get another Iron Brew. Woohoo! Thank you. I know it's not good for me, but to be fair, today I have been very good. I've been very healthy. My lunch today was a roast dinner, and I only had one roast potato. And only one Yorkshire pudding. You do not know how hard that was. And I had actual vegetables. And I mean, not just peas. I actually had cabbage and carrots. I was healthy. Oh, goodness knows. Once we get into treaties and all the other things, it's working out where it all goes. The thing is, it all depends on what happens next. Because if the Germans run for home, they still have a high seas fleet intact. And if the German ships are destroyed, they probably get home and still have a high seas fleet intact. If the German ships are damaged, then they probably get caught up by the whole Grand Fleet, and Jellicoe gets the memorial. Jellicoe gets the Masonic Monument, because that's going to be a total destruction. They're going slowly anyway, Michael Cooch, but not as slowly as they will be with damaged ships. You'd be talking 10 to 11 knots maximum. And the only reason I am drinking extra Iron Brew is because the water tastes funny. I'm not sure what's happened to the water. It's either the glass I washed earlier. Oh, perhaps it's the soap in her. Oh yeah, now I know. Oh, I know. Sorry, I cleaned my glass earlier, and I don't think I managed to get all the soap out of it. So that's what I'm tasting, and just realised why the water tastes funny. There's soap in the glass. Anyway, leaving that to one side. Very liquid does not taste nice. I do not recommend drinking it, even when it's been severely watered down. Nice. If the Admiral class of fast battleships, how many get built? Possibly all 4. Well, they were not giants. Oh. Now, that's always what 1901 does if you don't tilt the glass while serving it. But if I tilt the glass, then I have to concentrate on that more now. So the next phase of the battle after the run to the north is Windy Corner. And Windy Corner is a particularly interesting scenario. Now, HMS Invincible, as mentioned, disabled Wiesbaden at 1756. She'd have probably blown her up at 1756. So the point I was trying to mention earlier with defence is she wouldn't have been getting closer to Wiesbaden to be engaged and sunk, because if Invincible has better shells, then Wiesbaden goes boom. Now, at this point, we have a scenario where very realistically, probably at least 3 battle cruisers and at least 1 dreadnought battleship are sunk. So if the Germans do continue on to to actually engage in the battle, because they think they can, I don't know, somehow beat up the Queen Elizabeth because they're trying to run away, and they think they can actually catch them and destroy them, then they're going to be running into, I don't know, maybe they've got fiery rage in their blood and they're going, we will get vengeance for our lost comrades. I have no idea. But Windy Corner happens. And Windy Corner is the point at which, honestly, Hipper comes within range of Hood's battle squadron. Now, in this scenario, Indomitable gets hit by Deflinger, which, as we discussed, would have been sunk earlier. Seydlitz also hits Indomitable. Lutzow takes 10 hits from Line, Inflexible, and Invincible, including 2 below the waterline, which doomed Hipper's flagship. But as we talked about, under our scenario, all 3 of those are already sunk. So therefore, there is no chance of Invincible suddenly appearing as a clear target before Lutzow and Derflinger, and there's no chance that the 2 German ships will then manage to fire 3 salvos each at Invincible and sink her in 90 seconds after the 3rd salvo strikes Invincible's Q turret amidships. And interestingly enough, Princess Royal receives hits from the Makraf, the battleship Makraf, which, as we've also talked about, is the battleship which could have been blown up. So, literally, Princess Royal, which gets through okay, and Invincible could have not been damaged by those engagements because those ships are gone. Okay? Does that make sense? Have I created a logic and I'm following it along? Warsprite probably is still doing a turning and a circling enthusiast. Steaming at top speed, she managed to take 13 hits, drawing the fire away from Warrior and other ships. She then withdraws northward as she's ordered back to port by Evan Thomas. But she survives. You'd also have to admit, though, if she'd already managed to help sink 3 battle cruisers and a battleship, she'd already served her purpose. And Horace Hood does survive to see the launch of next Hood, because at this point he's still alive. I cannot say what would happen in the rest of the battle. Maybe they'd still end up in a bad place, but, you know, Hood's still around. Now, at 18:30 hours, the main fleet action is joined, and of course, Jellicoe crosses Shears T. Now, this is the point at which, in this engagement, we're adding in Queen Elizabeth. Okay? We're adding in Queen Elizabeth at this point, rather than in the 5th Battle Squadron, because if she's with the 5th Battle Squadron, that probably adds extra ships getting sunk. Because Queen Elizabeth is the one which has been commissioned longest, has had her crew trained up the most, and has been used as a flagship. So in nicest way, Queen Elizabeth is probably got a very good, very strained up crew, which means she would have registered even more hits, which would have probably taken up the German losses even greater, or at least the German damage even greater, if it's not losses, and probably would have forced the Germans to withdraw, so they wouldn't be here. So in order for me to think of a scenario that Windy Corner and Crossing the Sea actually happens, and the Germans are actually coming north and make it viable, I've had to make sure Queen Elizabeth, if she is there, because she would be there, because Gallipoli wouldn't probably have happened, or would have happened in a different way, is with the main Grand Fleet, for some reason. The only reason I can count with her for being with the Grand Fleet and not with 5th Battle Squadron is if she is Jellicoe's flagship. Okay? So, that's it. Now, Jellicoe's flagship in history, Iron Duke, managed to score hits on Koenig, the Dreadnought, very quickly. Here you go, crossing the T. Here we have the lovely Koenig. And the Koenig, in terms of her being hit, well, she doesn't really have a nice time. She has already been hit by Warspite in a battle, but Koenig gets hit by... Nine Duke fires 9 salvos at Koenig from a range of 12,000 yards, and the 13.5-inch shell struck the forward conning tower. Instead of penetrating, it ricocheted off and detonated some 50 yards past the ship. Again, she's then struck by another 13.5-inch shell later on from Iron Duke, and the shell hit the ship's just after the rearmost gun turret and caused significant structural damage, filling several rooms with smoke. But again, it explodes on contact. It doesn't penetrate. And a heavy shell did manage to penetrate the battle at one point, penetrated the main armor deck toward the bow. Another but didn't blow up. Another shell hit the armoured bulkhead at the corner and shoved it back 5 feet, breaking off a large piece from the armour plate in the process. Shell splinters from another hit penetrated several of the casemates that held 15cm secondary guns, 2 of which were disabled. She got 1,600 tons of water into the ship. She has not, nevertheless, still remains combat effective after all these hits, and she ends up having to go back to Kiel after the battle and getting repaired. But the point is, if she's being hit by 15-inch shells instead from Queen Elizabeth rather than 13.5-inch shells from Iron Duke, and if those shells work and do what they're supposed to because they've gone through proper testing and proper trials, so they're Greenboy-esque shells, or maybe even Greenboy shells, she would have been blown to kingdom come. Wait, a Queen bot with an aimbot, Dr. Clarke, yes. So Queen Elizabeth with working shells and Jellicoe on board her. Bye-bye, German Navy. Koenig. My pronunciation of Koenig is funny. Koenig. There is a Mount Evan Thomas in Alberta named after the Admiral. Elevation, 3,097 meters. Very good for him. Right then. At this point, Scheer ordered his fleet to turn and disengage at 18:33 hours. I would point out also that during the brief exchange, in this first exchange, only 10 of the 24 battleship dreadnoughts in the ground fleet actually opened fire. Although 5th Battle Squadron, barring HMS Warspite, which has been set off, keeps engaging. Scheer realizes he's heading into a death trap and decides to disengage at 18:33 hours. They executed the 180 degrees turn in unison, battle about turn to starboard. The Gefechtsschwertung nach Starboard. Schleswig-Holstein. I can still do that. But then they can counter with Worcestershire. Right. So Scheer declares at this point that they were being confronted by a large portion of the English fleet. The entire arc, stretching from north to east, was a sea of fire. The flash from the muzzles of guns was seen distinctly through the mist and smoke on the horizon, although the ships themselves were not distinguishable. Because now, the visibility was on the side of the British. Jellicoe did not chase directly south. Now, at 18:40 hours, the battleships at the rear of Jellicoe's line were in fact sighting and avoiding torpedoes. And at 18:54 hours, HMS Marlborough was hit by a torpedo, probably fired from the disabled Wiesbaden, which reduced her speed to 16 knots. Marlborough, of course, being a very nice Iron Duke class battleship. Now, Scheer then decides to turn back. His plan was to try and buy time by surprising enemy and upset his plans for the rest of the day, and hoping it would facilitate the breaking loose at night. Now, unfortunately, to turn to the east took his ships directly again towards Jellicoe's fully deployed battle line. And at the same time, please note, HMS Shark is doing her duty. She is fighting alone against 4 German torpedo boats and a disabled V-48. She's eventually torpedoed and sunk at 1902 by S-54, and Loftus-Jones, her captain, is awarded a Victoria Cross for his actions in continuing to fight against all odds. And again, if you're starting to think, hang on, the British destroyers being absolutely insane and not understanding the concept of we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, or they have more power than us is something which is limited to World War II. No, the Royal Navy spends the entirety of the 1920s and 30s preserving that level of elite insanity in their destroyers. They spend the next 20 years cultivating that to let it out again in World War II. They basically take all that insanity, all that they outnumber us, yay, more targets, approach to naval combat, and they inoculate it into the the destroyer force. And then by World War II, they unleash them. Schleswig-Holstein. So, now, this time, the arc of fire, the second crossing the T, was higher, it was tighter and deadlier. And so the German battleships, Koenig, Grosse Kurfürst, Markgraf, and Kaiser are all hit. And Helgoland as well, from the first squadron. Now, again, if these vessels were being hit by far better shells, the odds are, well, as we talked about, Markgraf could already have been sunk. Koenig could already have been sunk. In which case, you're going to be aiming at other ships. There is a very real possibility at this point the Germans could be looking at other ships they've lost. And they could already have lost a lot of ships. Marcanus, HMS Spitfire, being a Taffy nearly 30 years before Samar. Yeah? Are you saying the RN cultivate officers who can think for themselves? They did try that. Okay, Yolanda. What if somebody at the Admiralty season puts it down as Iron Brew? Is that a mistake or a prophecy? With the speed they're building, yeah. Could well be built before they notice a spelling mistake. Yeah, it's the entire Royal Navy destroyer force is basically a practice in we have no concept of A, they outnumber us, and B, it's basically, it can be calculated as, it's almost if someone, when they take them off to destroyer classroom, you know, to train young officers to become destroyer officers, they sit there and destroy. You remember Admiral Nelson famously turned a blind eye to a signal to carry on an attack at Copenhagen? Yes, Professor. That is now your governing principle of life. Pirates to captain our submarines and diplomats for the cruisers. It works. It works. Now, this is the point at which, of course, the Germans decide to do a second Gefechtschutzwerdung, Gefechtschutzwerdung, and a battle about turn. And she orders a torpedo attack by his destroyers, and potentially the 4 remaining battle cruisers. Der Flinger, under Hipper was not aboard a ship at this point because Lutzow has fallen out and had to go away. So Der Flinger, under command of Captain Hartong, leads the battle cruisers into what was described by many as the greatest concentration of naval gunfire any fleet commander had ever faced. At ranges as close as 4 miles, that's 3.5 nautical miles or 6.4 kilometres. All the battle cruisers except Moltke are hit further. But remember, if we're talking about Der Flinger, Lutzow, and Sailor should already be gone. So instead of you having 4 remaining, you should probably be having... Well, Lutzow, Der Flinger, and Sailor are gone. So Moltke will still be alive. Basically, you're down to 2 battle cruisers. And 18 of the battleships are firing. British battleships are firing simultaneously. Der Flinger has 2 main turrets destroyed in this action, but again, she wouldn't be there. And honestly, I can't. If they've got working shells, I cannot see 2 battle cruisers surviving. Sheer slips away under this. Excuse me. Someone's just knocking on my door. They want me to go outside. What have they done now? What's up? What's up? Oh. Okay. Water butt was overflowing with water. Rather like a couple of German battleships would have been at this point. So, as you can guess, this is now, night action then becomes even less likely. I honestly think it's very unlikely it's even got to this point. I think if you've had even them damaged rather than sunk, and I think at least the 3 battlecruisers would have been sunk by this point, so in which case you'd have had a scenario of the British have lost 2 battlecruisers, the Germans have lost 3 battlecruisers, who's won the battle? And a battleship severely damaged, or if not sunk. I think the Germans would have headed for home. I think if they've got a battleship severely damaged, and maybe doing as little as 10 knots, I think then they have a real scenario that they turn into. The battle that they get is Jellicoe rushing up and going, I know exactly where you are, and basically enveloping them. I could see a battle starting to turn up where the British are basically form a sort of a semicircle around the Germans and are firing at them from all sides. But the scenario is that they've carried on, okay? The British will not have lost probably a third battlecruiser. And at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the Germans lose the rest of their battlecruisers. I wouldn't be surprised if the Germans lost a few more ships, because as twilight fades tonight, King George V exchanges some final shots with the SS Westfalen, which is one of the Nassau class battleships, and basically, the last major actions take place between 2019 hours and 2035 hours as battlecruisers and battleships catch up with their German counterparts, and as they get one more hit on Princess Royal, but they score 5 more on Sailets, which would all been sunk by this point. Then we have night fighting. And Jellicoe is very lurgy towards night fighting because he's very conscious of the Grand Fleet's deficiencies in night fighting. They have the size, but he wants to avoid a major engagement till early dawn because the size doesn't work for him in night fighting. I have no idea now what's happened because we've now got so far from historical events. I think, as said, the likely scenario for me is the Germans turn for home. I would say the Germans probably turn for home definitely when Makarov is hit, but probably you are talking about 5:30. So they try to make a run for it at 5:30. Instead of running towards the British ship, they're at 5:30. And again, there's that scenario where if the Germans are slowed down by a damaged ship, they are going to be in far more trouble than if they are sunk. If they're sunk, well, they have a chance because they don't have to stay and protect them. No, Main, you do realise that Jellicoe and Fisher would immediately try to build a World War II tribal in World War I as a sort of escort to the battleships you would think would result. Probably would build some sort of scout cruiser which would look like what a World War II tribal destroyer would look like. If Shearer's lost 3 battlecruisers, he's going to get out of Dodge. Yeah, I think, honestly, they've lost at least 3 battlecruisers at this point. I'm just looking. This is just based on the number of hits those ships have already received by that point, and their likely response. Because you don't want to hang around. When you've lost 3 battlecruisers, you're not going to hang around. The Koenig is not a pre-dreadnought. The Koenig is the dreadnought battleship. Destroyers were actually quite good at telling. So 2 Koenigs class dreadnought battleships, 1 Sailors class battlecruiser, 2 Deflinger class battlecruisers, 1 Von der Tann class battlecruisers have been sunk. Pretty much. That's the odds, at least. And there are other ships which are severely damaged. Steve Clarke, it's Alex. So I was saying that the future Alex Clarke and Drac are going to be saying that armoured and undergunned German battlecruisers were a failure like the Invincibles are. Honestly, I would say that none of the battlecruisers are really a failure as long as they're used for what they're intended for. It's when they're used for things they're not supposed to be used for that they're against trouble. We've got rain and snow today, and it's caused the water tubs. It was starting to fall over. Hence, my sister had spotted it on the cameras and had come out, looked in, and tried to move it herself, and then she came and knocked on my door. So with the Germans having no fleet screen left, we should the Germans had to go to unrestricted warfare and American entry to World War I in 1915. Well, here is the scenario that breaks out. It depends on how many ships the German High Seas Fleet loses. If the Germans lose this many ships in May 1916, they have a problem. well, let's be honest, June 1916. It's the 1st of June, 31st of May, 1st of June. If they lose this many ships, they are in trouble. If they end up in a night fight, again, I wouldn't see that changing much over what actually happened. But there again, there's the likelihood that any ship which has been hit is far more damaged than it was damaged originally. So again, if the Germans have actually gone into the full fleet engagement, they could be taking a load of injured ships home, which could lead to a night action where the British light forces, i.e. the Harwich destroy. There's a scenario where if the Germans are going slower, they run into the Harwich force rather than the destroyers at the back, destroyers at the different end of the Royal Navy of the fleet. And if they run into the Harwich force at night, that's not good, because the Harwich force is the only force the British have which are really, really trained and drilled for night fighting. So a night action in which it's the Harwich force versus the retreating Germans is not good for the Germans. Wayne's wonderful. Rear Admiral Marv and the pre-dreadnought squadron of Millstone because of their speed. Yes, but damaged dreadnoughts are going to be just as slow, if not slower. The pre-dreads might be used to try and slow down the Grand Fleet, but that's not going to be much of a road bump for them. They could be at this point less strong enough to dominate the Baltic. But again, remember, under this scenario, if this all happens, you don't have Gallipoli going on, draining, or you had Gallipoli as a successful operation, someone might actually consider the idea of forcing the Denmark Straits and going up to the Baltic coast of Germany. The generals never sideline Kaiser. Not officially. Sorry, I got this in my year wrong. This is in the middle of Verdun and just before the Somme. A big loss of ships along one of the casualties and lack of hope of winning the war following that. That is the scenario, Verdun. You might get a negotiated peace earlier in the war. There are lots of potential consequences for this. If we go to a sort of summary scenario, if you have shell production change, you could have a lot of real damage done to all sorts of things of the German fleet. And the fact is, the British were fast enough at getting shells in when they did want to get the shells in, and they could have done it. You could argue, actually, they could have done it earlier in the war even easier, because there weren't the huge land offensives sapping so much artillery. The army was still warming up to its use of artillery in 1914, 1915. So there had actually been less of a problem, and they could have actually got their artillery in even more quickly, because whilst the factories themselves weren't really affected in terms of production of naval shells, the limitations in terms of explosive supply, etc., were affected. Now, if you haven't also if you're able to resupply Russia by the Dardanelles, either because Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, hasn't entered the war, or when they did enter the war, you were actually able to succeed at Gallipoli because they hadn't reinforced it or thought of anything of it after the 5th of November 1914. So nothing happened to actually make that in any way, shape, or form stronger, and so the British have managed to push through quickly. You probably have Russia keep having supplies, which could keep Russia in the war, and that causes more problems for the Germans. It's just that's a knock-on effect of the Goeben and Breslau scenario, and it's gonna cause consequences for the rest of the war. It is, but honestly, you're into a scenario where you're so far away from the original history, you're writing new history at this point. You've had basically a victorious Battle of Jutland. Not on the Trafalgar scale, not a complete unless the Germans do get damaged ships and are proceeding very slowly and therefore are not within safe spaces by dawn on the 1st of June, and so it comes, daylight shines out and the British know immediately where the Germans are, and they can't make it home to safety because the British fleet is in the way, and then the British fleet just mops them up on the 1st of June. Which is honestly what could have happened anyway with the damage they did receive on the 31st. Anyway, but if they've had even more damage, there's going to be less of them left, and there's going to be even more of a mopping up question. It was not just their fuses. As we went through, there were problems with all the British shells. If we go back to the report, all the way up to the report. The report which Dreyer produced basically said the caps were too soft, tending to get torn off during oblique impacts. Shell bodies were not strong enough, often breaking up, which prevented or reduced the effectiveness of the filling inside. Both these factors compounded the lyddite issues, which caused them often to blow off prematurely. And on top of this, the fuses were unreliable. So there are lots of issues with British shells. Think Bjord's torpedo design. It would turn into another glorious 1st of June. I have a feeling the entire 31st of May would get forgotten, and it would be entirely the Battle of Jutland the 1st of June, and their second glorious 1st of June. It all depends on how many German ships get sunk. If the Germans manage to... The Germans take their losses of the battle cruisers and basically to 5th Battle Squadron and go, we're bugging out now, we're not going to try and engage 5th Battle Squadron. Then they're fine. They can probably get away. If they decide they want to try and take out 5th Battle Squadron, then they're going to lose ships, and they're going to get damaged ships, especially with this scenario of them having better shells. And if they persist after them when they see and get caught by the Grand Fleet, then things get even worse. It is not a good scenario. Now, there are some potential long-term consequences, because I was asked what could be the potential consequences. Well, the potential consequences long-term are quite significant, because you think about it, this has just shown the power of battleships, and they've won a decisive victory, is what the British will be marketing as. Battle cruisers have been blown up equally on both sides, so they're being called a folly, but the fast battleships, the Queen Elizabeth, saved the day. So obviously, faster, better armoured, more powerful battleships are the way to go. Which could be interesting, because you have to remember at this point, the Americans have already committed themselves to the standard battleships, which are slow. They're 21-knot ships. So that's going to cause interesting, but it also might mean that the Lexingtons, when they get laid down, are actually laid down as fast battleships rather than battlecruisers. It's probably going to cause the Japanese to have a mind up. Oops. And the British have just assured their naval supremacy, as they'll feel. The thing is, if you don't have the night engagement, and the Germans still manage to get away in the night, and the British are not going to be as motivated and grudgingly over the interwar period focused on night operations. Theoretically. However, because of the Harwich Force, and because of the reasoning the British have for developing night operations, especially in the late 1920s, early 1930s, when they're looking at operating around the world and the potential threats they could be dealing with under that scenario, I think they probably still do. Maybe not as much, but I think they still do. The Admiral class, I think they would get designed as fast battleships. As said, they would not be designed and built as battlecruisers. They would be designed and built as fast battleships. And they would be true fast battleships. I think they would probably take the speed to 28 knots. Because that's probably what they decide was fast enough. And then they would up the armour to full battleship level. So it would be full Queen Elizabeth, if not better armour than Queen Elizabeth class. Probably R class plus armour. With, I would say, at least 8 15-inch guns. But maybe 10. They might well try to get back the extra 15-inch gun. Or they might go for a triple turret. They might actually make that change and go for a triple turret and try and get 12 15-inch guns and 28 knots. Either way, I think the Admiral class that emerges, more of them are built, and they are more. They are not as fast, but they are certainly more armoured and more capable. Or they go for 18-inch guns. That's quite possible. So the UK is either going for a 28-knot improved Queen Elizabeth triple turrets, or big 28-knot Queen Elizabeth design with 16.5-inch to 18-inch guns for Admiral follow-ups. Yeah. They could well jump up to 16.5-inch or 18-inch guns. Again, they could be an Agincourt. The naval treaties, they're an interesting scenario. The naval treaties are a very interesting scenario. Because theoretically, if the war carries on the same, barring there's the victory at Jutland, they'll probably still happen. How their exact form will depend on the ships, which the Admiral class basically, and how many of them are built and what they come out as. But it might be the Admiral class become the standard by which all battleships are judged. But I would add there is also a scenario whereby the war changes dramatically. And let me explain that. If the High Seas Fleet is severely damaged, and this is the scenario which I was talking about whereby they have damaged ships and they get caught by the Grand Fleet and they can't run away. And it's daylight, and they can't run away. Yes, they might sacrifice the pre-dreadnoughts and the battlecruisers to try and give themselves time charging at the British, but they're still going to lose a lot of ships. And there's a question at what point can the Germans not come back from and present a serious enough problem to the Royal Navy? And that's closer than you probably think. Because the Royal Navy, if the Germans are putting forward in this battle fleet everything they have available other than the Goeben, which in this scenario is already written off, they have got 16 dreadnoughts, 6 pre-dreadnoughts, and 5 battlecruisers. If they lose 3 battlecruisers, they've got trouble. They are down a large proportion of their fleet. I think 1/9 of their fleet. Okay? If they lose a couple of dreadnoughts, and they lose 6 pre-dreadnoughts, and they lose remaining 2 battlecruisers, well, that means they have lost 11 ships. They're down to 16. They are down to... Well, no. They've lost... Not 11 ships. They've lost... 5, 6, and 2. 13 ships. Which means they're down to 14. The British start the battle with 27. Well, no, with 37. They have 37, 38 ships, because Queen Elizabeth was there. Sorry. Brain mass. They start the battle with 38 ships. If the British have lost 3, they're down to 35. If you're down to 14, you're down to less than half the strength of the Royal Navy. The real problem is if you lose any more than that. Because at that point, the British can theoretically force their way into the Baltic. Because you have to think about it, what kind of losses will the British take? And the British, remember, are building the Courageous class, they're building Renown, Repulse, and they've got the rest of the R class coming on. They've got another 3 R class battleships coming along online. They've got Renown, Repulse, Courageous, and Glorious coming along line. They have got literally 7 more ships coming in. So they've lost 3. That's not good. That takes them down from 38 to 35. They got to 42. So they've got 42 to your 14. They've now got 3-to-1 advantage in numbers. They might well force that the Denmark Straits. And if they can blockade the Baltic coast of Germany in any way, shape or form, Germany doesn't last long in World War I. Especially if they're simultaneously getting supplies to Russia through Gallipoli, through the Dardanelles. So that is the problem. And then what does that potentially leave as a long-term consequence? Well, if the war ends more quickly, and the war is dictated in many ways at that point probably as the result of Britain, A, France doesn't suffer as much, but B, America doesn't get involved. So America doesn't really become the arsenal of democracy and they still keep their isolationism going. There are going to be issues, but the odds of anyone listening to Wilson going, I want to do a naval treaty and I've got these plans for peace when America hasn't even been involved in the war, would be very, very low to non-existent. In which case you don't have naval treaties. In which case all sorts of things change. Take care, Tanif. All sorts of things change. Tillman is an interesting personality in history. Honestly, if no naval treaties, then Japan might well go bankrupt in a naval race with America. It could be an interesting scenario. Washington Naval Treaty came from... No, the Washington Naval Treaty, all the legwork was started by Wilson. It was started with his 14 points. It was laid up with his convention to form the League of Nations. That formed the basis that then led to the stuff which was taken over by the Harding administration. Honestly, the Wilson administration put forward a lot of stuff that started off and led to the Washington Naval Treaty. But if you don't have if you don't have Wilson's 14 points in the League of Nations, you don't have the groundwork to develop the Washington Naval Treaty. Especially if America hasn't joined World War I, and World War I ends in probably. And this is the thing: is Britain going to want to cut its navy when its navy has just dictated peace to Germany, and just shown the world how powerful Britain is? Probably not. I doubt Britain keeps any of the earlier ships still. Now, things do not go easily because here's another bonus. And I thought you'd enjoy this. So, after the Battle of Jutland, this is an important thing to remember, the Battle of Jutland. Daily Mail reporter in Search of News managed to secure an interview at the Admiralty with Captain Reginald Hall, Director of the Intelligence Division. Hall, being usual self, responded to the line of question posed thusly, after telling the intrepid reporter that he was making a fool of himself, as they had done very well. The reporter said, "How do you make that out?" "Well," said the director of Intelligence Division, "if I kick you out this room, which I shall do presently, and you can't get back in again, isn't that a victory for me, even if I get a black eye in the process?" Now, Night 681, you've already brought up the U-boats and the flu pandemic. Well, the flu pandemic is still going to be probably a factor, but the U-boats, believe it or not, are not as much of a problem as you might necessarily think. Because whilst the U-boats are scary, they are a problem, there is a lot of time between the second happy period in the First World War and their second campaign of unrestricted U-boat warfare, U-boat warfare, and what happens. And it all depends on the speed. Because in the nicest way, the British won't hang around waiting. The time between the British winning a Battle of Jutland, especially a scenario where they, as I said, where that scenario happens. If the British do not, if the High Seas Fleet is taken out down to 14 or less dreadnoughts, the time between the British actually going and doing that and pushing their way into the Baltic is going to be measured in weeks, if not days. Okay, they're literally going to go home, fix what they can fix, load up with as much ammunition as they can, and go for it. They're not going to hang around. So it would take time for the Germans to be able. It takes time for the Germans to actually mount the submarine warfare they end up mounting, because they have to build the submarines. They have to build the infrastructure to support them. And saying that, the British also will have a large number of destroyers and all sorts of things, because they're not doing convoy duty. They'll go completely, absolutely at this point. Because remember, Jellicoe hasn't gone back to the first to become First Sea Lord. He hasn't therefore had Henderson write the report, and he hasn't justified the convoy system. So they've got a lot more destroyers to call upon to escort the Grand Fleet. And they will go in with every single destroyer, every single light cruiser, every single thing that can float that can help them deal with submarine threat, it will go in. And if you've watched the submarine video that I did, and I went live yesterday, and it's a lot of recorded video, you'll notice that a key thing I tell people is that submarines are not the wonder weapon of the world. Not even in World War One are they a wonder weapon. Yes, they have torpedoes. Yes, those are great, but they want to use those. They want to use those against capital ships, but they're usually more successful. They have to do many things with them. In this battle, some of the submarines that could have been involved could have fired. Couldn't fire because A, they weren't fast enough to keep up the ships, and B, they get their periscope jammed or some other thing, in which case they give away their position and they have to dive because they can't attack with a torpedo because the ships are manoeuvring and trying to ram them. HMS Dreadnought sinks a submarine because she rams it and then reverses over it just to be cruel. The flu pandemic is 19 onwards. Jutland is 1916. You might not get the flu pandemic, but I think you probably still get the flu pandemic myself. Now, this is the scenario we're dealing with, because it changes a lot of things. You make a small change, that will change a small change in shell design, shell trialing, so you reveal all the problems, you fix them all. Shell trialing due to an experience of looking at a ship, which you were supposed to sink and then sink. And you then move on, and it grow from there. And what we have here is you change a battle, you change the outcome of a war and the speed of outcome of war, because Churchill is right when he says that Jellicoe is the only person who could lose a war in an afternoon. But he's not complete. He's the only one. He's right in that he's the only person on the Allied side who could. Scheer could also lose a war in an afternoon. If Scheer loses enough of the ground fleet, the high seas fleet, that the ground fleet can trump them without worrying about it, they can push into the Baltic. Yes, it will be at risk because of submarines, but they will have a lot of destroyers, a lot of escorts with them, and again, what is the Baltic? The Baltic's shallow, especially in the parts they're going to be going near the German coast. And shallow water is not good for submarines to hide in. Carvel said also there might not be a successful revolution, especially not with Lenin in Russia, and Austria-Hungary might or might not disintegrate. Yeah. Austria-Hungary is still disintegrating. There was no heir or succession plan for Franz Ferdinand, although that is just my guess. It might not disintegrate. It might turn into a republic, or they might find someone. It wouldn't be the first time someone has found a monarchy has gone hunting for a suitable person of suitable birth. Right. As a rule, the British went and found the Hanoverians. The Austro-Hungarians might well have come to the British royal family and gone, "Do you have anyone who you don't need at this precise time?" It could become more of a federated system. Usually, don't they just grab a French general? That's when Napoleon's quite powerful. They grab a French general. At the end of this scenario, I think they might have been grabbing a British member of the British royal family, because that would probably be better politically, because that would be a good way to go, yeah, we were friends with the Germans, but they're all lost now, we're now at peace with you, and we're now your friends, because look, we have a British royal family, our member of the royal family, as our king. Aren't we nice? Please, please stop the French hurting us. And the Italians. It's basically the regal version of a human shield. Well, they could go for Bertie, but they could also go for, and more likely, this is going to sound strange, they would more likely go for, I think, oh, no, he died 1892, he died, of course, 1936, he died 1871, no. There are options. There are a few options wandering around. The British probably wouldn't want to send... you'd have to take this wrong... don't take this the wrong way, but the British would be careful about not sending someone in direct line of succession. If you send if you send Bertie, then they've got a claim on the British crown. You need to get it past that point. So you would probably go to Edward VII, go up to Edward VII and look at his siblings and go, are any of you alive and are suitable? Of Queen Victoria. Well, let's see. She has Leopold, the Duke of Albany. Yeah, there's a few around. There's a few of Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught-Stone, Strackfern. There's a few going around that are potential in that sort of period. Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Stratham is a good one. He doesn't die till 1942, age 91, so he's quite suitable. If you want to go for a younger one than him, no, he's basically it. So I would say more likely Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Stratham would be the other option. Austro-Hungary could still continue. Karl I was emperor, and his son Otto was selected, quite active in the 1940s. Good luck, Glyn. Go walk your jack. But we haven't finished yet because there is one thing you might want to see before you go. The other option is to have Bertie publicly renounce his claim to the British throne before claiming the Austro-Hungarian throne. That's never considered a real option in British terminology. They don't like that. Because then what happens if something happens to your heir? No, the British don't like that. The British, if you ever look at the British suggestions whenever they offer people, it's never the heir and the spare. It's always the people beyond that. And Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Stratham is perfectly beyond that. Trouble is, George's brothers are both dead. So the dad's brother, Bertie and Andrew, Bertie's father's brothers are both dead. So that means that Bertie and I suppose there's his younger brother. There is the third in line, but he's very young by this point. So yeah, they would probably give him. Oh, and the thing is, he comes with Prince Arthur of Connaught. He already comes with a son, and his daughter marries becomes the Crown Princess of Sweden. So, you know, he's already got royal connections as Prince Arthur. Now, here is the thing about Beatty. We've already had a lot of conversations tonight, and you've kept talking about Seymour. I want to point something out to you. You talk about Seymour, who is the junior of his staff officers. His chief of staff is Captain Rudolf Bettenich. His flag lieutenant senior is Commander Reginald Drax. Was pictured on the pictured along with Beatty. Both of these officers outrank Seymour. So Seymour is his communications officer, but there are two other staff officers literally running around, including Drax, who has written a highly regarded book on naval tactics at this point, and also been one of the first graduates of the Royal Navy's, still quite new at that point, Staff Officer course. So, you should not keep blaming Seymour is one thing, but there is a whole staff there, and then Seymour is the junior of the staff. It's one of the funny things I find about history, is we blame Seymour because he is the junior, and he's the comms officer, so he's the signal officer, so he's getting. But there are two others who are more senior officers who are supposed to be there to train him in the post, including this person, who is literally the chief of staff. His job is to run him and look after him and make sure his orders are interpreted correctly, and the senior flag lieutenant is there to look after the rest of the staff and make sure they're running correctly. So this guy has the job of training Seymour, of making sure he knows what he's doing. There was a fun fact. Otto's youngest son, Georg von Habsburg, is actually Hungary's ambassador in Paris. Oh, that is fun. But, so this is one of the things which we need to sort of remember as a factor. Uh, Everyone sort of jumps onto Seymour and Seymour gets the blame, but there are actual people there whose job is to... In this guy is the person in charge, and he selects Seymour over Somerville. You then have Captain Rudolf Betnik, who's his chief of staff there, who I can't find a decent picture of, and Commander Reginald Drax, who are all senior to Lieutenant Commander Seymour. And their job is to run the team and run the staff. So, I'm sorry, as much as I like Drax, because of some of the stuff he does in the interwar periods and is fairly good, it's his job. I think, honestly, there is a different narrative which will come about from it, because I think it could well, especially if they lose to the British Navy and the British Navy appear off the German shores and basically blast away and go, you're gone. And it causes that scenario, that causes Germany to fall. Instead of Germany being stabbed in the back, it's going to be a scenario of we challenged the Royal Navy and lost. We're the most powerful army in the world, but we stupidly built a navy and challenged the British, and so we lost because we took on the British. It might cause a level it might cause a significant change in analysis, in that the analysis leading into World War II, etc., might be not to build a navy. Or it might be they concentrate on building a navy which is entirely submarine based. No point having capital ships at all of any kind. You have no idea. You can't really say what happens. Oh, trust me. Reginald Drax is not his actual name when he's in there. At the time, he is known as Reginald Alma Ramfurly Plunkett. And it becomes Reginald Alma Ramfurly Plunkett Ernal Earl Drax. He is a quadruple-barreled surname, which I can sympathise with, because technically I am Govan Hewitt Clarke. So I'm technically a triple-barreled. He's a quadruple-barreled surname. Plunkett Ernal Earl Drax. Thanks, Fushi. Right, so, as said, I will be on... I'm going to do last questions, and then I'm going to be on the... I am looking for cars, and Fushi keeps sending me messages about cars very kindly. Between him and my mum, I think they're both trying to make me... they're both pushing me to buy cars, and I'm going to, and I'm looking at them, but there's also the fact that there is one of my uncles who's talking about giving me his car, because he might lose it for his eyesight. So I'm sort of going... I am going to buy a car, but I want to wait for him to make a decision, because if I can get a car for £0 transferred to me, that is very different. Then even if I could get a car nice value, I will. Yeah, £0 is always better. That's an, oh, submarine navy sounds good, but wait, Aztec, sloops, corvettes, frigate swarm. Yeah, yeah. As I said, if you build a one-dimensional navy, you get interesting. So what we've got coming up? Next week we have... Why have I not updated this? Why? Goodness gracious me. For goodness sake, Clarke. Why have you used the old one in this? When did you start writing this? Ay, caramba. Right then, what have we got coming up? We have the attack on Copenhagen next week. We have the Battle of Yarman, which is where I have all these extra Chinese books coming from. I will tell you one thing, okay, about these lovely books. They are wonderful. They are wonderful, but they are gloriously expensive, okay? They are gloriously expensive. So, they have everything you can imagine in, and it's a massive series, and I'm slowly buying them all, but they are really, really massive. My Subaru got written off before Christmas in a low-speed crash. And when I say low-speed crash, its brakes stopped working, and it went into the back of something at 5 miles an hour. Less than 5 miles an hour. I think I could walk faster. And they just decided, because of its age, it was too old and too expensive to repair. And it was a case of... I can only describe it as this. There's me sitting on the brake going, what? But, why are you not stopping? Because it would be one thing, I was actually in stop-go traffic at a light. So you're not going fast. It's not as if you're driving along the motorway or anything and you're going super fast and actually breaking law or something like that. And don't do that. I was in stop-go traffic, uphill, so you can imagine how slow you're going. And it's from stop. Okay. All right, we're moving. Okay. It's a little bit on accelerator because it's automatic. Because I have in automatic mode for going around London traffic because I honestly can't be... Just keep moving from first to second to first to second to third to first to second to... in London traffic just drives me insane. So I always have an automatic or at least a geartronic for London driving, because just leave it in the gear, turn on the radio, concentrate on where the traffic is, and just not bother about the rest is a good motto in my mind. But literally I was doing... It got there. But yeah, we've got all these coming up, and yeah, hopefully there's going to be some announcements out soon, maybe even as early as tomorrow, that are going to explain why it stops in June. And as said, I'm going to now say good thank you very much, everyone, and then I'm going to be quickly getting some more water from from the kitchen, and then coming back and being on Discord for about an hour to chat away with people on the... I think this week it's a turn of the Killick chat. Because I think last week I was in the general chat, wasn't I? Someone remind me. Was I in the general chat or the Killick chat last week? Because I'll be in the other one this week. I will wash the glass properly. So... Thank you very much, Govio Landa, Melanie640, Seneca Nero, Pabatsky, Jack Ray, Dan Freeman, Alt92, Match Dostal, William Cox, HMS Verdun, George Newman, Steve Clarke, thank you, Michael Cooch. Michael Cooch, what if, due to a staff mix-up, the Admiralty BT gets appointed CNC Med pre-war and Milne gets the battlecruiser fleet? Better or worse for the Iron World War I? Better. Milne is better. Milner's actually... Milner's not as dashing as BT, but he is far more of a proficient admiral. No, Seneca Nero, they're not going to get a navy big enough to challenge the Royal Navy, because whatever happens, if the Royal Navy's dictating the peace, and they will be dictating the peace, German naval industry is going to be destroyed. If you think the Treaty of Versailles was hard on their navy, just wait until you see a treaty which the Royal Navy dictates. They won't be less hard on everything else, but they'll be harder on the Navy. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, David Goulding. Thank you, Thomas Innefer. Thank you, Byron Newman. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, everyone. Ines Morrison. Thank you, Renan. Thank you, Mikey Newman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cosmo13. Thank you, everyone. Chris Alswick. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. And next week, of course, on the Era of Technology is Grand Strategy, when the world is really not enough. It really isn't. It's never enough. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Fushi Smith.